Hey, welcome to Sleep Crime Stories. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? A quick comment and a subscribe go a long way, it really helps. Now, turn down the lights, and let's begin tonight's case. The term psychopath is generally not used as an official diagnosis. Instead, it refers to a range of personality disorders, varying in severity, mild, moderate, or severe. People with such conditions often display a clear imbalance in their character and behavior. Some emotions and feelings are significantly lacking, while others completely take their place. What unites these individuals is their weak ability to regulate emotions and impulses. Today's story vividly illustrates how good and pleasant someone with these traits can appear at first glance, and what their uncontrollable and overly intense emotional reactions truly look like. Danielle Finley-Jones, a young Australian woman, was in search of personal happiness when she met the perfect man online. Someone who promised to love her until the very end. What did this lead to? You'll soon find out. Danielle Finley-Jones was born on October 20th, 1991, in Cranbrook, Western Sydney. She was the younger of two siblings, and grew up with her older brother Blake, who had always protected and looked after her. Her parents divorced when she was just 4 years old. After the divorce, Danielle and Blake stayed with their mother, Jacqueline, while their father played almost no role in their lives or upbringing. From a young age, Danielle was passionate about sports. She participated in several activities at the same time, but always loved soccer the most. As a schoolgirl, she joined a local soccer club. At first, she had to play with boys, as most girls in her area preferred dance or gymnastics. Later, Danielle became the team captain, won numerous prestigious sports awards, earned respect from her teammates, and gained admiration from fans. She eventually started coaching youth teams, and even represented women's soccer as the face of a major promotional campaign in 2017. After graduating high school, Danielle attended the University of Sydney, where she studied education and social work. Upon graduating, she started teaching at a local school, while continuing her involvement in sports. Danielle was a fighter by nature, never giving up and always achieving her goals. She successfully built a career in both fields, excelling in each. People who knew Danielle described her as intelligent, well-read, and engaging. She had a great sense of humor, and easily became the life of the party. Danielle loved lively gatherings, dancing, and having fun. She was seen as a creative powerhouse, and a source of endless energy. Danielle Finley-Jones had striking features, and a toned, athletic figure. But more than her appearance, she was known for her kindness and willingness to help anyone in need. It's no surprise that people gravitated toward her, and many men tried to win her affection. However, Danielle prioritized her career and fitness over her personal life, placing relationships not just on the back burner, but several steps behind her professional and athletic pursuits. Even as an independent adult, Danielle continued living in her mother Jacqueline's home. The two were incredibly close, acting more like best friends than parent and daughter. They understood each other without words, spent nearly all their free time together, and shared everything. Whether it was attending concerts, social events, or even nights out at clubs, they never had secrets or serious disagreements. By the time Danielle reached her 30s, she began seriously considering starting a family. She had a solid career, financial stability, and a large circle of friends, but still felt a profound sense of loneliness. She longed for love and a meaningful relationship, with someone she could trust completely, someone she could wake up next to and build a future with. Despite her many admirers, Danielle lacked experience in long-term relationships. Though she had dated and received plenty of attention, she had never viewed her boyfriends as potential life partners. If a relationship ever interfered with her work or personal goals, she ended it without hesitation. But now, she was ready for something more serious and lasting. Danielle actively maintains several social media profiles, where she frequently interacted with friends and acquaintances. She received plenty of messages from men asking her out or wanting to chat, but she believed that genuine connections were more likely to come from dedicated dating platforms. Following the advice of friends, she created a profile on the popular app Tinder. After months of swiping and chatting with different men, Danielle received a message from an attractive man named Ashley Goity. He was 4 years older than her and came across as friendly, kind, and charming. After a week of texting, Ashley suggested they meet in person for a date. Their first date went perfectly. They talked endlessly, laughed, and shared personal stories. It felt like they had known each other forever, with an instant connection and many shared interests. Ashley was charismatic and charming, winning Danielle over with his humor and warmth. After just a couple of dates, Danielle was so impressed with Ashley that she decided to introduce him to her mother. Jacqueline was equally charmed and gave Ashley her full approval, believing he could be a great husband and, in the future, a devoted father. However, it wasn't long before Ashley's true personality began to surface. He was controlling and deeply jealous. Surprisingly, this didn't bother Danielle. In fact, she found it flattering. No one had ever tried to impose rules on her or influence her decisions before, and this new dynamic felt different and intriguing to her. Danielle saw Ashley's jealousy as a sign of love and affection. In fact, she even found it flattering. But within just a month of dating, Ashley was already trying to take full control over her life and social connections. Despite these red flags, Danielle didn't raise any alarms. Instead, she decided to go along with his behavior, playing the role of the perfect girlfriend. Astonishingly, Danielle chose to overlook the obvious warning signs that Ashley was not who he seemed. She ignored his troubling behavior and began making serious plans for a future together, even considering marriage. It's likely that her lack of experience in serious relationships played a significant role in how the situation unfolded. Ashley continued to present himself as kind and caring, telling Danielle that he had always dreamed of starting a family. This deeply appealed to her and made her trust him even more. However, one of Danielle's close friends was the first to sense that something was wrong. She noticed that Ashley's jealousy sometimes escalated into erratic behavior, making him seem like a completely different person. But Danielle, caught up in her feelings, didn't take her friend's concerns seriously. In the month they had been together, Danielle introduced Ashley to her mother and a few close friends. However, most people in her circle only knew about him from her stories. On Saturday, December 17, 2022, Danielle planned to bring Ashley to a friendly gathering at a popular city bar where she intended to introduce him to more of her friends. The group gathered at the bar, enjoying the evening with casual conversation, dancing, and drinks. Ashley made a great impression. He was outgoing, polite, and friendly. Throughout the evening, he and Danielle sat close, often holding hands and exchanging smiles. They looked every bit the happy and loving couple, and there was no indication of any trouble brewing. Danielle had never introduced her past boyfriends to her friends because she had never planned on having serious long-term relationships. But this time was different. She presented Ashley almost like a fiancé, surprising everyone given that they had only been together for a little over a month. Still, her friends understood how important this relationship was to her. Everything seemed perfect, until someone in the group suggested a game involving bold and provocative questions, which everyone would answer randomly. It was all in good fun, with people coming up with creative and quirky questions on the spot. When it was Danielle's turn, she was asked if she had ever had a one-night stand with a stranger. The room fell silent. Danielle, clearly embarrassed, hesitated before offering a shy smile and admitting that she had. At that moment, Ashley's demeanor shifted dramatically. His face hardened and his behavior became hostile and erratic. Grabbing Danielle roughly by the arm, he turned her toward him and began yelling at her in front of everyone. He accused her of being irresponsible and immoral, using harsh and offensive language. The other guests were stunned, unsure if Ashley was joking or being serious. The mood turned uncomfortable as they watched Danielle, who appeared equally confused and caught off guard. She couldn't understand why Ashley had suddenly lashed out at her. Ashley claimed that during their first date, he had asked Danielle a similar question about fleeting romantic encounters, and she had denied it. Now she had given a different answer, and in front of others, which Ashley took as a personal insult. Her unthinking response in the light-hearted game triggered an uncontrollable and intense emotional reaction in him. Simply put, he exploded with anger and his state bordered on a complete loss of control. Although Ashley's reaction was grossly disproportionate to the situation, Danielle felt guilty about what had happened and tried to defuse the conflict. She attempted to smooth things over, but Ashley rudely pushed her away and stormed out of the bar. Even outside, he continued the argument, sending her a series of offensive text messages. Danielle apologized to her friends for the scene and said she would try to calm Ashley down by talking to him face to face. She stepped outside to find him, staying away for about 15 minutes before they both returned to the bar together. They sat back down with the group as if nothing had happened. It seemed the argument was resolved, though the awkward tension lingered among those who had witnessed it. No one brought up the incident again, hoping to avoid further conflict. The group chalked it up to alcohol, stress, and nerves about meeting new people. The rest of the evening passed uneventfully, with Ashley behaving calmly for the remainder of the night. After midnight, the group began to part ways. Since Danielle had a long way to travel home, she had already arranged to spend the night at her friend Taylor's house with Ashley. Taylor didn't mind. He lived in a suburban neighborhood, about a 20-minute drive from the bar. Taylor's girlfriend Rachel, who hadn't been drinking that night, offered to drive them there. Taylor prepared a cozy guest room for Danielle and Ashley on the lower level of his home. The room was a spacious bedroom with its own bathroom. Its small windows were positioned near the ceiling, providing minimal light, but it was otherwise comfortable and private. Danielle and Ashley settled in for the night, thanking their host for his hospitality. By all appearances, the earlier argument had been forgotten, and the couple seemed calm and composed, as though nothing had happened at the bar. At around 3 a.m., Taylor woke up to strange noises coming from the guest room. His girlfriend Rachel also stirred and looked at him questioningly. They could hear faint thuds and what sounded like muffled cries. Assuming the couple had reconciled and were engaging in an intimate moment, they dismissed the noises and went back to sleep. Within minutes, the house fell silent, and they slept soundly until 10:30 a.m. When Taylor and Rachel finally woke up, they were surprised to find that their guests had not yet left the room. Respecting their privacy, and assuming they were catching up on sleep after the previous evening, the couple decided not to disturb them. However, as the clock neared 2 p.m., and there was still no sign of Danielle or Ashley, Taylor went downstairs to check on them. He knocked softly on the door but got no response. After waiting a moment, he knocked louder, but there was still silence. Concerned, Taylor carefully opened the door and peeked inside. At first glance, the room appeared empty. The bed was unmade, Danielle's clothes were draped over a chair, and her shoes were neatly placed on the floor. However, the eerie stillness of the room was unsettling. As Taylor stepped inside, his eyes were immediately drawn to a blanket lying on the floor near the wall. Underneath it, he could make out the shape of a body. Panicking, Taylor rushed closer and lifted the blanket. Danielle's lifeless body lay on the floor, unclothed, showing clear signs of a brutal attack and strangulation. Her face had been so severely disfigured that it was almost unrecognizable, reduced to a horrifying mess of blood and injuries. She showed no signs of life and appeared to have been deceased for several hours, as her body was cold and rigid. Ashley was nowhere to be found, but the partially open window in the guest room hinted at how he might have escaped unnoticed. Terrified, Taylor ran out of the room and told Rachel everything. Shaken and scared, the couple immediately called the police and emergency services. However, it was too late for Danielle. Paramedics could only confirm her death. According to their initial assessment, she had died around 3 a.m., the same time Taylor and Rachel had heard the strange noises from the guest room. Had they checked on her then, it's possible they could have saved her life. Danielle's body was taken for forensic examination, which revealed the horrifying extent of her injuries. Before her death, she had suffered numerous wounds, indicating she had been viciously beaten with bare hands. Her nose, jaw, and cheekbone were fractured. Several teeth and one eye were destroyed, and she had sustained a closed skull fracture and multiple brain hemorrhages from the savage beating. It appeared that the attacker had forced her to the ground, pinned her beneath his weight to prevent her from escaping, and covered her mouth to stifle her cries. He then systematically struck her head with his fist, blow after blow. At some point, Danielle likely lost consciousness, but the assault continued. The attacker alternated between fists, striking her with relentless aggression. The cause of Danielle's death was determined to be mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled with bare hands. The evidence left no doubt that Ashley was responsible for the crime. He made no effort to cover his tracks. After the act, he simply washed the blood off his hands in the bathroom, got dressed and escaped through the window, leaving his fingerprints on the frame. Detectives soon discovered a witness who had seen someone walking away from Taylor's house around 4:30 a.m. The neighbor couldn't make out the man's face in detail, but described him as a white male wearing clothes that matched the description of what Ashley had been wearing that night. In their pursuit of the suspect, investigators reached out to Ashley's cell phone provider and obtained a recording of a call he made to his mother around 4 a.m., shortly after the crime. At the time of the call, Ashley was still in the room with Danielle's body. The conversation revealed his frantic state. He was crying uncontrollably and repeatedly claiming that he hadn't done anything wrong. Ashley insisted that someone else had entered the room and harmed Danielle, and he claimed to have only discovered her body. His tone suggested he was desperately trying to convince not only his mother but also himself of this fabricated version of events. Fortunately, Ashley forgot to turn off his phone after the call, which allowed authorities to track his location. He had fled to a remote mountainous area, seemingly attempting to hide there. Police eventually located him near a scenic overlook by a steep cliff. When they approached, Ashley leapt over the safety barrier and clung to the edge of the cliff, threatening to jump if anyone came closer. Specially trained negotiators and psychologists were dispatched to the scene. They spent hours trying to calm Ashley, assuring him that if he truly was innocent, he had nothing to fear. The negotiations lasted for nearly 12 hours, during which Ashley remained perched precariously on the edge. As midnight approached, Ashley, exhausted and distracted, was grabbed by officers who managed to pull him back to safety. Ashley's behavior was erratic. He screamed, resisted, cried, and repeatedly threatened to end his own life. In his unstable state, questioning him was impossible. He was taken to a psychiatric facility, where professionals stabilized him and concluded that he had been in such a heightened emotional state that he likely would have jumped had the officers not acted in time. Ashley was later diagnosed with several psychological disorders, including excitable psychopathy, a condition marked by sudden outbursts of rage and episodes of unprovoked aggression. Following the arrest of Ashley Goide, investigators dug into his background, only to be horrified by what they discovered. Danielle was far from his first victim. Over the past couple of years alone, more than 10 women had filed police reports against him, citing physical assaults, attempted harm, and pleas for protection from his stalking and harassment. As it turned out, Ashley grew up without a father, struggled with severe mental health issues from a young age, and exhibited extreme aggression toward others. His first victims were his own mother and 2 sisters, who silently endured his outbursts and physical aggression without reporting him, fearing the consequences for their family. When he was calm, Ashley could appear completely normal and rational. However, the smallest trigger could shatter this facade, unleashing what could only be described as a monstrous side. During his teenage years, Ashley developed sudden and intense fixations, particularly in his relationships with women. Blessed with good looks and a charming personality, he had little trouble meeting new romantic partners, but once involved, he quickly viewed these women as his property. If a girlfriend tried to disagree with him, he would resort to physical aggression. If a partner ended the relationship, he would begin stalking and attacking her whenever the opportunity arose. Between 2015 and 2021, at least 11 women filed complaints against Ashley for harassment, assault, and threats of harm. In 4 of these cases, the situations were somehow resolved amicably, leading the victims to withdraw their statements. However, the remaining women succeeded in obtaining restraining orders to keep him away. In early 2021, Ashley viciously assaulted one of his girlfriends and nearly strangled her. The woman took the case to court, and Ashley was found guilty. Yet, he faced only minor consequences, receiving a fine community service and a restraining order prohibiting him from contacting the victim. Later that summer, Ashley attacked another woman, inflicting severe injuries. She barely managed to escape, and filed a police report accusing him of attempted harm. This time, Ashley was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. Despite the findings that he posed a high risk of reoffending, the court handed him a lenient sentence, 3 months in jail, and an order to pay restitution to the victim. In 2022, Ashley targeted another former girlfriend after she left him. He broke into her room late at night and attempted to strangle her. The woman screamed, waking her parents, who intervened, called the police, and saved her from further harm. Even in this case, the court showed leniency, sentencing Ashley to just 6 months in jail. He was released after serving only 3.5 months, shortly before meeting Danielle Finley Jones. The brutal crime involving Danielle Finley Jones gained widespread media attention, with newspapers covering the story extensively and news broadcasts dedicating segments to the case. During the investigation, 14 additional women came forward to police, revealing that they too had been harmed by Ashley Goide at various times, but had remained silent out of fear of retaliation. Their accounts shared striking similarities. Ashley initially appeared kind and charming, but after a few dates he turned into a predator, attacking, beating, and attempting to strangle them. Notably, the perpetrator never used weapons, relying solely on his bare hands. In court, many of these women testified as victims, voicing their concerns that Ashley might once again escape with minimal punishment, be released, and seek revenge on them. Their fears seemed justified given the number of times the repeat offender had received lenient sentences or administrative penalties for serious crimes. It appeared that justice might finally catch up to Goide. This time he had committed a heinous act, with overwhelming evidence pointing directly at him. However, on April 6, 2024, before the official sentencing could take place, Ashley was found hanging in his jail cell. While it seemed he had taken his own life, questions arose due to his behavior. Ashley showed no remorse for his actions and was confident he would be declared insane, which would land him in a more comfortable psychiatric facility rather than a prison cell. Given these circumstances, some suspected that Ashley's cellmates might have played a role in his death, particularly since he had reportedly attacked them on multiple occasions. The murder of Danielle left her family shattered. Her mother and brother struggled to cope with the loss, channeling their grief into advocacy. They began campaigning for stricter regulations on dating apps, proposing mandatory background checks that automatically flagged users with serious criminal histories. Their goal was to help others avoid unknowingly meeting dangerous individuals, making it possible to see potential risks before starting a relationship. Still with me? Good, that means you're ready for the rest. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more cases just like this one. Have you ever wondered how well you truly know the people living next door? What lies behind their friendly smiles and casual greetings? While there are no definitive guidelines for identifying potentially dangerous individuals among your acquaintances, psychologists and investigators agree that those with psychopathic tendencies are more likely to commit violent crimes. If someone's behavior ever raises red flags, it's best to keep your distance. This unsettling case begins with Brian and Beverly Moak, a seemingly perfect couple whose life looked like a fairy tale. They were deeply in love, financially secure, and enjoyed traveling and spending time together. But everything changed when they moved into a new neighborhood. Not long after settling in, both Brian and Beverly were discovered lifeless in their home. Blood evidence at the scene led investigators straight to a nearby house. The motive behind this horrific act shocked even the most seasoned detectives. The love story of Brian and Beverly Moak. Brian and Beverly first met in the spring of 2001 at a mutual friend's party. At the time, they were both college students, but from the moment they locked eyes, it was clear they had found something special. What started as mutual admiration quickly deepened into a powerful connection, and they became inseparable. That summer, the couple took turns visiting each other's families, introducing their partners to their parents, and openly sharing their serious intentions. Both families immediately approved of the relationship, noting how well the two complemented each other. Brian and Beverly had been lively and adventurous from a young age. They thrived on sports, excitement, and new experiences, never content to stay still for long. Beverly was a talented athlete who excelled in baseball and track, played guitar with ease, and had a passion for learning new languages. Her radiant smile could light up a room, and she was adored by her friends and peers alike. Brian had always been attracted to more dangerous and unconventional sports. He was passionate about rock climbing, surfing, and diving, and he loved taking risks. A true adventurer at heart, he saw danger not as a threat, but as a challenge he was always ready to face. Every year, he tried to visit a new place and learn a new skill. When Brian and Beverly first saw and spoke to each other, they immediately realized they were on the same wavelength. This became the starting point for their intense and fulfilling relationship. Together, they climbed mountains, skied and snowboarded, went scuba diving, and conquered waves and peaks alike. Despite their whirlwind romance and seemingly perfect relationship, the couple wasn't in a rush to get married. They both wanted to finish their education first. Once they graduated, they focused on saving for a house. Brian began building a career at an industrial company, and Beverly got a job as a hotel administrator, where her language skills were invaluable. On May 15, 2006, the couple officially tied the knot. They held a beautiful ceremony by the ocean, inviting only their closest family and friends. Afterward, they went on a long honeymoon, visiting several countries. When they returned, Brian and Beverly purchased a spacious home in the quiet town of Graham in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. The house was located in a scenic and sparsely populated area near a forest and a river. It was a perfect place to start their family and enjoy a peaceful life. Brian worked as an engineer at a branch of a large industrial company, while Beverly focused on translation work and decided to pursue a second degree. The couple quickly got to know their neighbors and made friends in their new town. Unfortunately, their happy and carefree life didn't last long. A shocking crime in a peaceful neighborhood. On Saturday, November 17, 2007, at around 8 a.m., Brian's friend Stephen arrived at the couple's house. The two had planned to go fishing that morning. Stephen knocked on the door but got no response. Thinking that Brian had probably overslept, Stephen knocked louder and waited, but the house was silent. Stephen decided to wait in his car for about 30 minutes, trying to call Brian repeatedly. However, his calls went unanswered. Frustrated and feeling a bit upset that his friend might have changed plans without telling him, Stephen eventually left to fish on his own, since he had all the necessary gear with him. Later that day, still unable to reach Brian or Beverly, Stephen decided to return to their house. Once again, there was no answer at the door. This time, Stephen decided to walk around the property and look through the windows. He was starting to feel uneasy. Brian was a responsible and punctual person who wouldn't just disappear without notifying anyone. When Stephen reached the garage, he looked through a small window and saw that the couple's car was parked inside. This made him even more anxious, but he tried to push away any bad thoughts. Moving to the living room window, he attempted to see inside, but as it was already getting dark outside and the house lights were off, it was hard to make anything out. What he could see, however, left him deeply alarmed. The TV was lying face down on the floor, and just beyond it, something large and unmoving was on the ground. Stephen rushed back to his car to grab his fishing flashlight, switched it on, and directed the beam into the living room. What he saw froze him in terror. On the floor lay two bodies, partially covered with a blanket that was soaked through with blood. One bare foot stuck out from one side and a hand was visible on the other. Horrified, Stephen immediately called emergency services to report what he had seen. He waited for law enforcement to arrive, staying by the house of his friends. When officers arrived, Stephen was the first to be interviewed. He recounted everything he knew about the day and expressed deep regret that he hadn't checked the windows earlier that morning when neither Brian nor Beverly answered his knocks or calls. Examining the crime scene, the front door wasn't locked, nor was it forced open, which immediately raised suspicions. Inside, in the living room, the lifeless bodies of the homeowners were discovered. Both had been dead for at least 12 hours, based on initial observations. The cause of death was determined to be gunshot wounds inflicted by a large-caliber weapon. Each victim had been shot 3 times, leaving no chance of survival. The precision of the attack indicated that the assailant was determined and deliberate. But why? There were no signs of theft. Personal belongings, cell phones, and even cash were untouched, ruling out robbery as a motive. There were no signs of struggle, and apart from the gunshot wounds, the bodies showed no evidence of other injuries or aggression. Investigators were left with the chilling impression that this was either a calculated execution or a deeply personal act of vengeance. However, according to witnesses, the couple had no known enemies or unresolved conflicts. The bodies had been moved after the crime, as evidenced by drag marks smeared with blood across the floor. The perpetrator had clumsily attempted to clean up, leaving smeared blood trails and splatters on the walls and furniture, indicating where the victims had been during the attack. 6 spent shell casings were found at the scene. Surprisingly, the assailant hadn't bothered to collect them. Forensics later confirmed the shots had been fired from a .22 caliber revolver. Investigators concluded that both victims were shot with the same weapon and likely by a single perpetrator. The unbroken lock suggested that the couple had willingly let the visitor inside. Detectives theorized that Brian might have answered a knock at the door, recognized the visitor, and let them in. Perhaps he invited the person into the house and turned toward the living room. But as soon as he did, the assailant pulled out a firearm and fired 3 shots at close range into Brian's back. 1 bullet exited his body and struck the television screen, causing it to topple over onto the floor. The noise likely drew Beverly out of the bedroom. When she saw her husband lying in a pool of blood and the assailant standing nearby, she tried to run. Tragically, she didn't make it far before 3 shots struck her in the back, killing her in the hallway. Her body was later dragged into the living room and placed beside Brian's. Both victims were still wearing pajamas, suggesting the crime occurred early in the morning while they were asleep. Why the assailant had covered the bodies with a blanket remained a mystery. The incomplete cleanup. The drag marks on the floor were smeared, as if someone had tried to clean them but only made the scene messier. A large bloodstain near the bodies had been disturbed, as though someone had tried to sweep it away. Behind the couch, investigators found a plastic broom with a long handle, its bristles matted with dried blood. However, the perpetrator had meticulously wiped the broom handle clean of fingerprints, which explained why it had been left behind at the scene. It soon became clear why the broom had been used. The perpetrator had been trying to erase bloody shoe prints from the floor, scrubbing meticulously. Similarly, smudged fingerprints and palm prints were found on walls, furniture, and door handles, making identification impossible. Despite the assailants' efforts to clean up and obscure their tracks, seasoned forensic investigators knew that the longer a criminal stayed at the scene, the greater the chance of leaving behind something incriminating. Their instincts proved correct. On the blanket covering the victims' bodies, they found a critical clue: a partial boot print. The print wasn't obvious at first because it wasn't stained with blood. Instead, it was imprinted where the floor had only a light layer of blood and the tread pattern appeared on the fabric beneath it. The blanket was sent to a lab, where forensic specialists identified the tread as belonging to a rare model of heavy-duty work boots with a distinctive sole pattern. Further investigation revealed that a construction company in Clearfield County had recently purchased several pairs of this exact boot. With this lead, investigators narrowed their list of potential suspects and began by questioning employees of the company. In addition to the shoe print, detectives found a palm print on one of the house's surfaces. It seemed like a breakthrough, and there was hope that the case would be solved in days. However, when the print was run through law enforcement databases, no matches were found. This suggested the perpetrator had no prior record and had never been fingerprinted by police. The first suspect, naturally, the initial suspect was Stephen, the friend who had discovered the bodies and reported the crime to law enforcement. He had visited the crime scene twice that day, which raised suspicion. However, Stephen explained that he had assumed earlier in the morning that Brian and Beverly were simply asleep, which is why he didn't call the police until later. When Stephen realized he was a suspect, he was shocked and outraged. He claimed he had spent nearly the entire day fishing alone by the river, a location where no one else had seen him, meaning he had no alibi. Nevertheless, investigators used footage from traffic cameras to verify his timeline. The recordings confirmed that he had spent the day traveling to and from the fishing site as he had described. Fingerprint analysis further cleared Stephen. His prints didn't match any found at the scene, and tests for gunshot residue on his skin and clothing came back negative. Additionally, Stephen had no connection to the construction company that had purchased the boots, and the size of the boot prints didn't match his shoe size. With no evidence tying him to the crime, all suspicions against him were dropped. An unexpected witness meanwhile, detectives conducted extensive interviews with neighbors in hopes of finding witnesses. When they knocked on the door of Daniel and Jennifer Tabarez, who lived across the street from the Mokes, they finally got a promising lead. Daniel answered the door and explained that his wife Jennifer was at work, but that he was willing to answer their questions. He revealed that around 5:30 a.m. on the day of the crime, he heard unusual sounds coming from the Mokes' home. Loud noises that he now realized sounded like gunshots. Curious but cautious, Daniel had looked out his window and noticed a white pickup truck parked near the Mokes' house. He was certain the vehicle didn't belong to the couple. Minutes after the loud sounds were heard, 2 men exited the Mokes' house. The witness, Daniel Tabarez, wasn't able to get a good look at them due to the low light just before dawn. However, he provided a detailed description of the driver of the white pickup truck parked near the house. According to Daniel, the driver was a white man around 40 years old, of solid build, with long, dark hair tied back in a ponytail and a mustache. He also noticed a tattoo on the man's left hand, though he couldn't make out the design. While this information seemed promising, no other neighbors reported seeing anything similar. Friends, family, and co-workers of Brian and Beverly couldn't identify anyone in their circle who matched this description or drove a truck like that. Furthermore, the vehicle didn't appear on any nearby traffic cameras, raising the possibility that the perpetrators had used a back road through the woods to avoid detection. The white pickup truck was listed in a county-wide alert, but no leads emerged. A new suspect emerges. During a conversation with detectives, Beverly's mother recalled that her daughter had mentioned a neighbor, Jeremy Flint, a couple of months before the crime. Jeremy, a 22-year-old man, had been on law enforcement's radar for dealing prohibited substances. His house was known for frequent visits by suspicious individuals, and other neighbors had spoken negatively about him. This led investigators to consider him as a potential suspect in the brutal double crime. When officers visited Jeremy's home, he wasn't there. Their initial thought was that he might have fled after committing the crime. Further questioning of neighbors revealed that shortly before the tragedy, Brian and Beverly had hosted a small party at their home. Jeremy, uninvited and under the influence of illicit substances, had shown up unexpectedly. Witnesses described his behavior as aggressive. He harassed some of the women, insulted guests, and stirred up conflicts. Eventually, he was forced to leave, but not before vowing that the couple would regret their actions. The next day, Brian and Beverly noticed several items missing from their home, including a cell phone and a gun with ammunition that had been stored in a drawer in their pantry. Certain that Jeremy was responsible, the couple decided to confront him. They went to his house and politely but firmly demanded their belongings back, warning him that they would go to the police if the items weren't returned. This impulsive threat, directed at someone with ties to criminal activities, could have been a dangerous mistake. Jeremy denied stealing anything and refused to return the items. However, the following day, the missing belongings mysteriously reappeared in the couple's backyard. Brian and Beverly were convinced that Jeremy had placed them there during the night. While the incident appeared resolved, Beverly remained uneasy. She grew fearful of being home alone and began urging her husband to consider moving to a different neighborhood. Jeremy's alibi. When Jeremy finally returned to town, law enforcement detained him immediately for questioning. However, it quickly became clear that he had been out of town for nearly a week, returning the day after the crime. He had traveled to another state to visit his parents and stayed with them for 6 days. His alibi was corroborated by numerous witnesses, and surveillance footage from a bar showed that he had been out drinking with friends on the night of the crime. Additionally, forensic analysis confirmed that Jeremy's fingerprints and palm prints didn't match those found at the scene. With no evidence tying him to the crime, Jeremy was ruled out as a suspect. New developments in the case. When investigators ran out of suspects and leads, they decided to revisit Daniel Tavares, the only witness in the case, hoping he might recall something new. During this follow-up visit, Daniel's story suddenly began to shift. He claimed to remember details about what the perpetrators were wearing, and even described one of the men exiting the house, noting that he had a scar on his cheek. This was a surprising change, as Daniel had previously stated that the men's faces were obscured by hoodies. A detective asked Daniel to point out the window he had been looking through during the incident. The detective examined the view and noticed that while it was daytime, it was still difficult to make out details of someone across the street. Considering the events had taken place during the early morning twilight, it seemed improbable that Daniel could have seen so much. This discrepancy suggested that Daniel might have been lying all along. But why? Could he have been involved in the crime himself? When investigators asked to see Daniel's shoes, he produced several pairs of sneakers, boots, and dress shoes, none of which matched the footprint found at the scene. Still, his changing story and increasingly suspicious behavior prompted detectives to take a closer look at Daniel himself. A troubled past. Daniel Tavares' background turned out to be deeply unsettling. Born in 1966 as the youngest child in a military family, his life took a dark turn early on. When Daniel was just 4 years old, his parents divorced, leaving him and his 3 older sisters in the care of their mother. His father remarried soon after and showed little interest in his children from the previous marriage. By the 9th grade, Daniel had dropped out of school, begun running away from home, stealing, and experimenting with prohibited substances. At 18, he was arrested for robbery for the first time. However, his estranged father unexpectedly intervened, helping him avoid a prison sentence in favor of probation. It seemed the father, perhaps motivated by guilt, wanted to give Daniel another chance. Despite this, Daniel continued to have frequent run-ins with the law over the years. Each time, he received minimal sentences for his crimes. In the late 1980s, Daniel moved to Florida to live with his father, who attempted to support him. His father paid for an expensive treatment program at a private rehabilitation clinic and tried to help Daniel find steady employment. But within 6 months, Daniel was caught stealing and dealing substances again. This time, his father gave up and sent him back to live with his mother. By this point, Daniel's mental health had begun to deteriorate due to his dependencies. Within a year, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and prescribed medication. However, Daniel rarely took his medications as directed. Instead, he mixed them with alcohol, leading to aggressive and dangerous outbursts. A violent incident in July 1991. During an argument with his mother, Daniel suddenly grabbed a knife and attacked her, inflicting nearly 30 wounds. She died at the scene. At his trial, Daniel claimed he had acted under the influence of voices in his head, which he said had ordered him to kill her. However, court-appointed psychiatrists determined that Daniel had been aware of his actions and was legally responsible. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Despite this sentence, Daniel was released on parole in 2006, having served less than the full term. While serving his prison sentence, Daniel Tavares began corresponding with Jennifer Freitas, and the two developed a romantic relationship. Jennifer waited for his release, and as soon as he was paroled, they married. Daniel moved into her home in the small town of Graham, arriving around the same time as the Mope couple. By relocating to a different state, Daniel violated the terms of his parole. He should have been arrested immediately, but a combination of police negligence and a technical error prevented that from happening. Somehow, Daniel's fingerprints were accidentally removed from the criminal database, which allowed him to evade detection. Even after investigators found a handprint at the Moke's crime scene, it seemed as though every factor was inexplicably working in his favor. Further investigation revealed that Daniel had briefly worked at a construction company that had purchased the rare work boots linked to the crime. However, detectives lacked concrete evidence to make an arrest. They needed to build their case carefully to avoid alerting Daniel or his potential accomplice, Jennifer. Setting the trap on November 24, 2007, Daniel was invited to the police station under the pretense of assisting in creating composite sketches of potential suspects. He eagerly agreed, and spent about an hour enthusiastically describing and helping draw portraits of people he had completely fabricated. While he was busy, another officer entered the room and casually mentioned that they needed to collect Daniel's fingerprints to rule him out as a suspect. Daniel hesitated, but ultimately agreed, confident that no traces of his presence remained at the crime scene. After fingerprinting, the officer casually remarked that investigators had found an unknown bloody handprint at the Moakes house. Daniel visibly tensed and began explaining that he had been friendly with the Moakes and often visited their home, where his prints could have left. The officer responded calmly, noting that there was no need to worry. After all, the handprint was bloody and clearly belonged to the perpetrator. A second detective then shifted the conversation to Daniel's past. He brought up the crime for which Daniel had served time, prompting Daniel to admit that he had killed his mother. Unexpectedly, Daniel began recounting the disturbing details of that crime, speaking with a chilling enthusiasm. He smiled as he described what he had done, exuding the aura of a true psychopath. Meanwhile, forensic specialists were comparing Daniel's prints to those found at the crime scene. When the results came back as a perfect match, detectives confronted Daniel with the evidence. His smug demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by rage. But before he could lash out, officers secured him in handcuffs and placed him under arrest. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, Daniel had no choice but to confess and cooperate with investigators. He explained that on the night before the crime, he had spent hours at a bar drinking and using strong substances. When he ran out of money to pay his tab, the bar staff threw him out, threatening to call the police. In a fit of rage, Daniel Tabarez suddenly recalled that he had given his neighbor, Brian Moak, a tattoo the previous month as a gesture. However, Daniel decided that he was owed payment for his work and arbitrarily demanded $50 for the service. Armed with his revolver, he showed up at the Moakes house at 5 a.m., while the couple was still asleep. Brian, annoyed by the early visit, opened the door and was immediately confronted with Daniel's demand for money. Confused and frustrated, Brian refused, telling Daniel to come back after he'd sobered up. But Daniel was insistent. To defuse the situation, Brian decided it was easier to pay and headed to another room to retrieve the money. As he walked away, he made a remark that Daniel found offensive. This triggered Daniel's fury. In a split-second decision, he drew his gun and fired 3 shots into Brian's back. The sound of gunfire woke Beverly, who came out to investigate. She saw her husband lying on the floor in a pool of blood and Daniel standing over him with a gun. Realizing the danger, she tried to run back to the bedroom but was shot 3 times in the back before she could escape. After realizing the gravity of what he had done, Daniel went home and enlisted his wife, Jennifer, to help clean up the crime scene. Disturbingly, Jennifer didn't seem surprised by his actions. Together, they moved Beverly's body into the living room, placing it beside Brian, and covered both with a blanket. It was Jennifer who suggested using a broom to erase the bloody footprints. She also meticulously wiped down surfaces to remove fingerprints, though she missed one crucial handprint. Once the cleaning was done, Daniel disposed of the murder weapon by throwing it into a nearby river. Despite extensive efforts by investigators, the revolver was never recovered. Daniel Tabarez was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His wife, Jennifer, expressed deep remorse, claiming she had helped Daniel out of fear for her own safety. She was sentenced to just 1 year in prison for tampering with evidence. In 2015, new homeowners renovating the property where Daniel had once lived with his mother made a horrifying discovery. While excavating the backyard, they unearthed human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed that the remains belonged to a young neighbor who had gone missing in 1990. Investigators determined that Daniel had been romantically interested in the woman, but after she rejected his advances, he reacted with lethal aggression. He buried her body in his mother's backyard, where it remained hidden for decades. This crime resulted in Daniel receiving a second life sentence. There was somebody awake and they actually heard your argument and your conversation between you and your wife. Really, what conversation was that? She's telling you to get off of me, And you're saying don't leave me, don't leave me. Early on the morning of January 1st, 2012, on a quiet street in the Grapevine Hollow neighborhood, the festive atmosphere turned to panic and horror. Ashley Fawless, a young mother, was being rushed to the hospital in an ambulance, her life hanging by a thread after suffering a gunshot wound to the head. Her parents, who had briefly left the house, were in a state of shock as they returned to find the home surrounded by police and paramedics. Just hours earlier, the house had been filled with joy and celebration. What had happened on this New Year's night? Only one person could have the answer, her husband, Tom, who was in the room at the time of the tragedy. But his version of events was raising more questions than it answered. Ashley's family was convinced they knew the truth, yet investigators faced numerous contradictions and strange details. The mystery behind the doors of that house went far deeper than anyone could have imagined. Early that morning, on January 1st, 2012, 28-year-old Ashley Fawless was taken to the hospital with a gunshot wound to her head. Ashley's family immediately believed they knew what had happened. To them, it was obvious that only one person could have been involved, her husband, Tom. He had been in the room with Ashley when the gunshot was fired. Known for his quick temper and controlling nature, Tom was the primary focus of suspicion for Ashley's family. However, for the police, the story was not so clear-cut. Contradictory evidence was found at the scene, requiring a thorough investigation. Witness statements kept changing, and Ashley's past proved to be just as complex as her present. Years would pass before new details emerged, casting a different light on the events of that night. The festive evening that began on December 31st, 2011, was supposed to be calm and family-focused. Tom and Ashley Fawless hosted a New Year's party at their home on Zinfandel Street. Guests danced, drank, and celebrated. Tom and Ashley seemed like a happy couple. Just an hour earlier, they had been dancing together, looking lovingly at one another, much to the delight of their guests. But everything changed as midnight approached, when Ashley announced she was going outside with her relatives, which angered Tom. The argument erupted suddenly in front of Ashley's family, who were the last guests remaining at the house. Tom began yelling at Ashley and her relatives, who tried to defend her. When their attempts to mediate failed, the relatives decided to leave, following Tom's demand. Slamming the door, Tom retreated to the bedroom. Ashley's parents also decided to leave, leaving the couple alone. A few hours later, tragedy struck. Tom was frustrated by Ashley's family's involvement in their personal lives. He felt Ashley shouldn't have gone outside with her parents, especially after they had been drinking throughout the evening. He demanded that Ashley's parents leave. After they were gone, the tension between the couple only grew stronger. Once the guests had left, Tom and Ashley were alone, and the argument reignited in the bedroom. Tom claimed that their fight was rooted in long-standing issues. Ashley, however, insisted she would live her life the way she wanted, regardless of his opinions. Tom accused her of being influenced by her family. Standing by the closet as he changed into pajamas, Tom said he heard Ashley handling the gun kept under the mattress. Tom tried to ask her what she was doing, but before he could finish, the shot rang out. Emergency services arrived at the scene in the early morning hours of January 1st, 2012. The police called in investigators from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation following allegations from Ashley's family. Her parents, Jenna Fox and Joe Redan, immediately accused Tom of being responsible for what had happened, citing his anger and aggression earlier that evening. At first glance, the evidence at the scene suggested Ashley had taken her own life. However, investigators noticed details that raised doubts. Crooked picture frames on the walls and items scattered across the floor hinted at a possible struggle before the gunshot. Divorce papers left and signed on a dresser seemed to confirm reports of tension in the marriage. Ashley and Tom had met in the spring of 2007 through an online dating site. Ashley was outgoing and full of energy, and Tom quickly fell for her. Ashley was already a mother to 2 daughters from a previous marriage, and their relationship moved quickly. A year after they met, the couple had a son, and just 2 weeks after his birth, they got married. In 2010, Tom adopted Ashley's daughters, and the family began living together. However, by the end of 2011, tension within the family was growing. Ashley's older daughters were 9 and 6 years old, and their youngest son had just celebrated his 3rd birthday. The boy had been diagnosed with hydrocephalus, which required several surgeries. The stress of his condition took a heavy toll on Ashley, who was struggling to balance her responsibilities as a mother with the difficulties in her marriage to Tom. These challenges created a tense atmosphere, setting the stage for the tragic events of that New Year's Eve. In 2010, Ashley Fallis was terminated from her position at the North Colorado Medical Center. The official reason given was insubordination, with reports citing aggressive behavior. Although she filed a lawsuit for wrongful termination and won a settlement, the legal victory did little to resolve her other challenges. The following year, she began a brief affair with a high school sweetheart, which further strained her already fragile marriage to Tom. During the same period, Ashley sought help from a psychiatrist. She was prescribed medication to reduce anxiety and stabilize her mood, as she had been experiencing up to 4 or 5 panic attacks per week. These struggles placed a significant strain on her relationship with Tom. While Tom was aware of her affair, he chose not to pursue a divorce. The divorce papers later found by investigators in their bedroom were drafted by Ashley herself back in 2009, during a time when the couple had considered separating due to conflicting work schedules. However, they ultimately decided to stay together and work on their relationship. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Tom claimed that their relationship had started to improve. He had secured steady employment with the Weld County Sheriff's Office, working as a corrections officer. Meanwhile, Ashley found her own way of coping with life's difficulties. She began speaking at conferences, sharing her experiences raising a child with hydrocephalus, and offering support to other parents in similar situations. A few weeks before New Year's Eve, Ashley took a home pregnancy test that came back positive. This was a shock, as she had undergone a sterilization procedure after the birth of their youngest child to prevent future pregnancies. Despite the odds, Ashley believed she might be pregnant. To protect the potential baby, she stopped taking her anxiety and mood-stabilizing medication. However, on the day of the party, December 31st, 2011, just hours before guests arrived, Ashley began her menstrual cycle. A second pregnancy test showed a negative result, which dealt an emotional blow to both her and Tom. That day had begun with a discussion about whether it might still be possible to reverse the sterilization procedure and try to have another child. Ashley's mother had originally suggested the procedure years earlier, but now the decisions were entirely theirs. Both Ashley and Tom expressed the desire to have another baby, and the sudden turn of events created significant emotional tension. All of this formed the backdrop to the events of that evening. The party at Ashley and Tom Fallis' home was lively. Despite the emotionally draining day, Ashley made every effort to appear cheerful. She drank, danced, and embraced her loved ones. According to her parents, Joe and Jenna, Ashley seemed happy and strong, just as she always did. They found it hard to believe that she would have willingly left her family behind. But Tom claimed that behind Ashley's outward calm lay deep emotional struggles her family wasn't aware of. Investigators paid close attention to Tom's version of the events that night. His interview began with a recounting of the day, how the negative pregnancy test result had set the tone, and how a small disagreement escalated when Ashley decided to go outside with her relatives. The argument spiraled into a discussion about Ashley's tendency to take her mother's advice too often. Tom said he didn't want to continue arguing and just wanted things to settle down. During Tom's police interview, investigators noticed scratches on his neck and chest. These marks raised suspicions as they could have been evidence of a struggle. Tom explained that he had recently shaved his chest for the first time and scratched his skin due to itching, which caused the red marks. As for the scratches on his neck, he said they could have been caused by stress. The questioning grew more intense as the interview continued. Tom felt that he was being accused of a crime and insisted on his innocence. He maintained that he did not shoot Ashley and that he wasn't in the room when the gun went off. Meanwhile, investigators were questioning neighbors and examining the home. A neighbor, Chelsea Origo, reported hearing Ashley shout, "Get off me," moments before the gunshot. This account contradicted Tom's claims. When investigators asked Tom about the shouting, He denied it and said he never forced Ashley to do anything against her will. He explained that he simply asked her to stop taking advice from her mother, as it was causing tension in their marriage. Investigators pressed him further, pointing out that the wound on the back of Ashley's head made it unlikely she could have shot herself. Tom demanded tests for gunpowder residue on his hands to prove his innocence. He also insisted that Ashley's hands be tested to determine whether she could have fired the gun. Despite his explanations, investigators remained skeptical due to the strange circumstances and conflicting evidence. While Tom was at the station, Ashley Fowlis was in the hospital where doctors fought to save her life. Tragically, a few hours after her admission, they announced that she had passed away. When Tom learned of her death, he was devastated. He claimed that when he held her in his arms after the incident, he saw her breathing and believed she had a chance to survive. After 3 hours of questioning, investigators had not obtained a confession from Tom, but they also could not rule him out as a suspect. Tom became increasingly agitated, maintaining his innocence and repeatedly stating that he could never harm his wife. For days after the incident, Ashley's death was officially ruled as a voluntary act. Although lab tests were not yet completed, the medical examiner concluded that her death was self-inflicted. The case was closed, leaving Ashley's family in shock and disbelief. They felt that the investigation had been rushed and that Tom had received preferential treatment because of his job in the county's correction system, which they believed influenced the investigation's outcome. However, Tom's role in a separate law enforcement agency unrelated to the investigation made it difficult to prove he had any connections to the detectives working on the case. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation was brought in almost immediately to ensure objectivity. Still, mistakes were made. Tom was not separated from potential witnesses at the scene, a violation of standard protocol. Additionally, his hands were not covered to preserve potential gunpowder residue, which could have served as crucial evidence. Ashley's family criticized the way Tom's interrogation was handled, arguing that 3 hours was insufficient for the primary person of interest in a case involving a suspicious death. They believed investigators did not seriously consider Tom a suspect until Ashley's parents, Jenna and Joe, insisted on it. Only after their persistent demands did detectives adjust their approach. But even then, the investigation remained superficial. Ultimately, Tom was allowed to leave. After the tragedy, Tom took the children and moved to another state, Indiana, to be closer to his sister. He enrolled in college to pursue a bachelor's degree and appeared to be trying to start fresh. Meanwhile, Ashley's parents, Jenna and Joe, refused to back down. They reached out to the media calling for justice. In interviews, they described Tom's short temper and emphasized that Ashley loved life and would never have willingly ended it. It was reporter Justin Joseph who uncovered a significant new witness, 17-year-old Nick Glover, a neighbor of the Fowlis family. Nick revealed that on January 1, 2012, he was home with friends when he saw emergency vehicles arrive at the Fowlis residence. He also claimed to have heard Tom tell Ashley's parents, "I shot my wife." Furthermore, Nick said he shared this information with Detective Michael Yates during an interview, but there was no record of his statement in the police reports. The absence of documentation raised new allegations against law enforcement, suggesting possible corruption and a cover-up. It was suspected that Detective Yates had intentionally ignored this critical testimony to protect Tom. In April 2014, more than 2 years after Ashley's death, the Evans Police Department reopened the case. Fresh allegations included claims that Yates had omitted key evidence and altered a witness's testimony to support the narrative that Ashley had taken her own life. Law enforcement officials denied any favoritism, stating that the investigation had been conducted fairly. On November 18, 2014, Tom Fowlis was arrested near his home in Indiana. Despite being charged with second-degree manslaughter, he continued to maintain his innocence. The case, which had gained significant public attention largely due to Justin Joseph's investigation, left many questions unanswered. For example, bruises on Ashley's legs sparked speculation about a flashlight found at the scene, which some believed might have been used during an altercation. However, it was later revealed that the flashlight belonged to an officer who had attempted to provide first aid and was unrelated to the crime. The prosecution argued that during a confrontation, Tom seized the Taurus 9mm handgun that Ashley kept under the mattress, pressed it to her head, and fired. He then lowered her body to the floor and called emergency services. At the trial, Ashley's mother, Jenna Fox, testified that Tom had acted aggressively at the New Year's Eve party, using harsh language that led to a conflict. Tom denied these allegations. Later during the trial, Jenna mentioned that there was a history of mental health issues in the family. Ashley's grandmother and uncle had taken their own lives. The prosecution used this as evidence to support their theory that Ashley may have willingly ended her life. However, Ashley's psychiatrist testified that as of December 2011, she showed no signs of depression. The defense later presented information that Ashley had been seeing 2 psychiatrists and a therapist simultaneously, which resulted in her receiving overlapping prescriptions. Forensic expert testimonies about the crime scene were contradictory. Dan Gilliam, who had spent hundreds of hours analyzing evidence, argued that Tom could not have shot his wife. According to Gilliam, individuals who fire weapons in a fit of rage rarely stop after a single shot. Despite his conclusions, Gilliam was called as a witness by the prosecution. Another expert, Jonathan Priest, reviewed the case materials and visited the crime scene. He concluded that Tom had been very close to Ashley when the shot was fired. Priest reasoned that if Tom had been farther away, there would have been more blood spread throughout the room. His analysis was based on the timeline of when Tom reached Ashley and began providing assistance, as documented by the first responders. The prosecution used this argument to challenge the defense's claims. The prosecution alleged that Ashley's emotional struggles were exacerbated by her unsuccessful attempts to conceive. An autopsy revealed that after a tubal ligation, she could have potentially become pregnant, but at the time of her death, she was not pregnant. However, Ashley reportedly believed she had been pregnant 3 times in the 9 months leading up to her death, which added to her emotional distress. Psychiatrists at the trial highlighted how these circumstances might have significantly impacted her mental state. In April 2014, 2 years after Ashley's death, the Evans Police Department reopened the investigation. New allegations surfaced against Detective Michael Yates, who was accused of excluding critical evidence and altering witness testimonies. Law enforcement officials continued to insist that the investigation had been conducted fairly and impartially, dismissing claims of bias. Nick Glover testified that on the night of Ashley Follis's death, he overheard Tom tell his parents, "I shot my wife." This statement became a pivotal part of the prosecution's case, especially after Nick's friend, Chelsea Orgo, gave her own account. Nick's mother, Kathy, claimed that Chelsea had also heard Ashley shouting, "Get off me." However, during the trial, Chelsea stated that she could not recall the argument clearly, because she consumed too much alcohol that night. Nick, on the other hand, insisted that he clearly remembered the events of that night, emphasizing that such a confession was unforgettable. His claims drew the attention of investigators and Detective Michael Yates, who had interviewed Nick on the day of Ashley's death, came under internal review for failing to document this alleged confession. However, the investigation found no misconduct on Yates's part, and he maintained that Nick had never made such a statement to him. During Nick Glover's cross-examination, defense attorneys highlighted several inconsistencies in his testimony. They pointed out that after Tom's alleged confession, Nick continued to maintain a friendly relationship with him, participating in family activities, including camping trips and Christmas celebrations. When questioned about why he acted this way, Nick responded over 90 times with, "I don't remember." Later, former Weld County Sheriff's Deputy Chris Graves also came forward, claiming he had heard Tom confess. According to Graves, he arrived at the scene and heard Tom shouting, "I can't believe I shot her. I can't believe she's dead." However, the defense pointed out inconsistencies in Graves' account. The crime scene was crowded with personnel from multiple agencies, family members, and neighbors, yet no one else reported hearing Tom's alleged outburst. Graves also did not detain Tom at the scene, explaining that it was outside his jurisdiction. Additionally, the defense noted that Chris Graves had not filed any reports about his statements for 3 years following the incident. He was later dismissed from the sheriff's office for dishonesty, further undermining his credibility. These factors cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. Many physical pieces of evidence also failed to support the prosecution's theory. Gunshot residue tests conducted on Tom's hands showed no traces, while residue was found on both of Ashley's hands. Scratches on Tom's chest, which might have indicated a struggle, contained no traces of Ashley's DNA. Likewise, nail scrapings from Ashley revealed no DNA from Tom. These findings raised serious doubts about the claim that there had been a physical altercation between the couple before the shot was fired. Tom Fowlis chose not to testify in his own defense. The trial lasted several weeks, during which more than 40 witnesses were called to testify. The defense's closing arguments focused on Ashley's mental health and the significant challenges she had faced in the months leading up to her death. Repeated pregnancy tests, her son's illness, prescription medications, job loss, and an affair. According to the defense, these factors could have contributed to the tragedy. A surprising development during the trial was the introduction of Ashley's alleged farewell letters. In these letters, she apologized to Tom, referred to herself as a failure, and wrote that she could no longer continue living. Ashley's family expressed doubts about the authenticity of these letters, as they had only learned of their existence years after her death. Her relatives claimed they had never seen any signs that Ashley might have written such letters and believed they were fabricated. After 3.5 hours of deliberation, including a 1-hour lunch break, the jury reached its verdict. Tom Fowlis was found not guilty of second-degree manslaughter and all related charges. The decision was a devastating blow to Ashley's family. Her parents, Jenna Fox and Joe Ragwin, firmly believed in Tom's guilt and filed lawsuits against the Evans Police Department, claiming that investigators had concealed or falsified evidence. They argued that Nick Glover's 2012 testimony had been ignored, and that other officers who might have overheard Tom's alleged confession remained silent. Ultimately, their lawsuits were dismissed. Despite the acquittal, Ashley's family refused to accept the outcome and remained convinced of Tom's culpability. However, they managed to a relationship with the children, securing visitation rights that allowed them to stay involved in their lives. Meanwhile, Tom Fowlis continues to face financial challenges due to legal expenses and is working to rebuild his life while pursuing his education. Following the tragedy, the children remained in Tom's care. He moved them to another state to start over and be closer to his sister. He explained to them that their mother had passed away in an accident, but plans to share more details with them when they are older. Despite all efforts to uncover the truth, the case remains shrouded in uncertainty. Questions linger and each answer seems to generate more doubt. The story of Ashley Fowlis is one of those cases where the line between truth and deception becomes blurred, leaving behind only shadows of suspicion and unresolved mysteries. It was a quiet evening in Dallas when Amber Geiger, a seasoned police officer, entered the wrong apartment. What happened next would send shockwaves through the community, the nation, and change the course of two families' lives forever. But was it truly a tragic mistake, or was something darker at play? As the courtroom drama unfolded, questions about race, power, and accountability took center stage. What happened that night, and who was really to blame? Botham Shem Jean was born on September 29, 1991, in Castries, the capital of the island nation of St. Lucia. His parents, Allison and Berthina Jean, were deeply religious and members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Raised in such a faith-driven environment, Botham's upbringing instilled in him strong moral values, including honesty, tolerance, and a desire to help others. These qualities were noted by many who knew him in his lifetime. From a young age, Botham stood out among his peers. His parents raised him with a strong sense of responsibility and a focus on education. In school, he demonstrated exceptional abilities in mathematics and music. At a young age, Botham began singing in the church choir, where his deep and moving voice immediately caught attention. Music became an important part of his life, and the church was a place where he felt supported and confident. After finishing school, Botham decided to continue his education in the United States. He chose to attend Hardin-Simmons University in Texas, where he pursued a degree in accounting. This decision marked an important milestone in his life, as moving to the US opened up new opportunities for professional growth and personal connections. After graduation, Botham secured a job as an accountant in Dallas. His career quickly flourished, and his colleagues highly valued his professionalism and approach to work. For Botham, working at PwC wasn't just a career step. It was an opportunity to contribute to society and provide for his family. He supported his parents, helped the youth in his community in St. Lucia, and dreamed of advancing further in his career. His coworkers remembered him as someone who always brought positivity and inspiration to the team, fostering a strong sense of camaraderie and striving for the best results. But it wasn't just his professional life that mattered to Botham. He was actively involved in the life of his church in Dallas, where he was part of the music group and often spent time with friends from the community. He found joy in simple things: cooking dinners for his friends, organizing parties to maintain friendships, and always sharing his sincere smile and support with others. His life was filled with plans for the future, full of optimism and a drive to achieve even greater things. Amber Geiger, on the other hand, came from a small town near Dallas. She was born on August 9, 1988, and grew up in a family where discipline and hard work were strongly emphasized. From an early age, Amber dreamed of becoming a police officer. Her father worked in local law enforcement, and she knew she wanted to follow in his footsteps to help people and bring order to society. Amber pursued this dream after high school by enrolling in the police academy. She worked hard and demonstrated the discipline and focus needed for a career in law enforcement. After graduating from the academy, Amber began her career with the Dallas Police Department, where she eventually became an officer. Her colleagues described her as determined and hardworking, though she often expressed frustration with the emotional strain and high stress of her job. The life of a police officer is always filled with risk and stress, and Amber was no exception. She often found herself in situations that required quick decisions, where her reaction had to be immediate. These working conditions took a toll on her emotional state. Over time, she became more withdrawn and cautious in her relationships with others, preferring to spend her free time alone to recharge. Amber Geiger was dedicated to her profession, but her life was full of contradictions. She tried to hide her vulnerabilities, but those who knew her well could see that she often felt lonely and sometimes even lost in the world. Despite her strong and determined character, her internal struggles and fatigue from the pressure made her life less stable. She would often return home late, exhausted and emotionally drained, which perhaps played a critical role in the tragic events that unfolded later. After moving to Dallas, Amber bought an apartment in a high-rise building not far from her workplace. She hoped that living close to her job would help her rest more and not waste too much time on commuting. Life in Dallas was supposed to be a fresh start for her, but this new beginning didn't bring the peace she had hoped for. Work, stress, and emotional strain became part of her daily routine. She often found it hard to manage the growing exhaustion, which led to tension and personal issues in her life. September 6, 2018 started for Botham Jean just like any other day. He woke up early in the morning as usual and headed to his office in downtown Dallas. It was another busy day, filled with meetings, discussions, and preparing reports for clients. Botham was someone who always strived to do his best at work, and this day was no different. His colleagues noticed his upbeat mood and the smile he shared with those around him. No one could have predicted that this would be the last day of his life. After work, Botham returned to his apartment in the Southside Flats complex, located in the heart of Dallas. His apartment was his sanctuary, a place where he could unwind after a long day. That evening, Botham decided to keep things simple. He planned to cook dinner, play his favorite music, and relax. He loved cooking, and it was one of his ways to relieve the stress of his workday. Meanwhile, Amber Geiger was finishing a 13-hour shift at the police station. That day had been especially grueling for her. Numerous calls, patrolling, and paperwork had completely worn her out. She felt a fatigue that seemed to weigh down her entire body, and all she wanted was to get home as quickly as possible. When her shift finally ended, Amber headed home, eager to collapse into bed and rest. However, her exhaustion and emotional depletion would play a pivotal role in the tragic events that were about to unfold. Amber arrived at her apartment complex, where she lived on the third floor. On her way to her apartment, her attention was distracted as she was scrolling through messages on her phone, reflecting on the day she had just experienced. At some point, she accidentally rode the elevator to the fourth floor instead of her own. The doors to the apartments in this building were similar, and in her tired state, she didn't notice that she had approached the wrong unit. The door to Botham Jean's apartment was slightly ajar, which immediately made her suspicious. In her exhaustion and confusion, she thought someone might have broken into her apartment. Amber drew her service weapon without considering the potential consequences. The only thought in her mind was that she needed to protect herself. She pushed the door open and entered. Inside, Botham, who was preparing dinner in his apartment, heard the noise. He turned toward the door, unsure of what was happening. Amber, seeing a figure inside, mistook him for an intruder and without hesitation fired twice. The shots echoed through the quiet apartment, and within moments, Botham fell to the floor. Amber turned on the lights and only then realized her mistake. She saw an unfamiliar man lying in a pool of blood, and it hit her that she had entered the wrong apartment. Panic and horror overwhelmed her. She rushed to Botham, trying to administer first aid. She called 911, explaining the situation to the operator, desperately trying to explain that she had entered the wrong unit and had shot someone. Her voice trembled with fear and regret as she pleaded with Botham to hold on, repeatedly saying she hadn't meant for this to happen. While waiting for emergency services to arrive, Amber attempted to stop the bleeding, but her efforts were in vain. Neighbors, who had heard the gunshots and cries, began to step into the hallway. Some of them also called the police, reporting the gunfire in the apartment complex. Paramedics arrived at the scene and tried to save Botham, but his injuries were fatal. That evening, the life of a young man with so many hopes and dreams was tragically cut short. Amber Geiger was detained at the scene. She appeared to be in a state of shock, completely disoriented, repeating that she hadn't meant for this to happen and that it was a mistake. She was taken to the police station for questioning. The police launched an investigation to understand how this tragedy unfolded. There were many questions. Why hadn't Amber realized she was not in her own apartment? Why had she resorted to using her weapon without confirming that there was an actual threat? These questions became central to the investigation and sparked intense public debate. As investigators gathered evidence, the public began to actively discuss the incident. The case sparked a massive outcry, especially in the context of racial issues and concerns about police abuse of power. Botham Jean was black, and many saw his death as yet another example of unjust treatment and bias by law enforcement. People began to ask, did Botham's race play a role in Amber mistaking him for an intruder and shooting him without attempting to assess the situation? Meanwhile, Botham's family was devastated by the events. His mother, Allison Jean, was in St. Lucia when she learned of the tragedy. It was a crushing blow for her. Her son, who had moved to the U.S. to build a better life, was killed in his own apartment. Allison began to demand justice for her son, calling on the public and authorities for a thorough and impartial investigation. She knew Botham as a kind, responsible, and hardworking person who posed no threat to anyone. In the days following the incident, there was a flood of contradictory reports and rumors. The media extensively covered the case, and public opinion was deeply divided. Some believed Amber had made a tragic mistake, while others argued her actions were the result of bias and an inability to properly assess the situation. Protests and rallies began in Dallas and other cities, with people taking to the streets demanding justice for Botham Jean and his family. During the investigation, it was revealed that Amber Geiger had been exhausted after a long shift and may have been disoriented due to her fatigue. Her defense attorneys argued that she acted in a state of stress and fear for her life. However, the prosecution maintained that her actions were inexcusable for a police officer who should be able to control their emotions and make sound decisions, especially in situations involving the use of a weapon. Witnesses who lived in the apartment complex testified that they heard screams and gunshots. Some of them tried to figure out what was happening, but no one expected such a tragic outcome. Investigators collected evidence, reviewed surveillance footage, and analyzed testimonies to reconstruct the full picture of the events that day. They were trying to determine whether this was truly a tragic mistake, or if other factors contributed to such a devastating outcome. After Amber Guyger's arrest, the case entered a new phase, a lengthy and complex process of investigation and trial preparation. Amber was charged with manslaughter. During the investigation, her attorneys argued that her actions were a tragic but unintentional mistake, caused by extreme exhaustion following a long shift. However, the prosecution maintained that Amber's actions were unacceptable for a trained police officer who was expected to assess situations carefully and avoid unnecessary use of force. One of the key pieces of evidence was footage from the surveillance cameras at the apartment complex where both Botham Jean and Amber Guyger lived. These recordings helped reconstruct the events of that night. The cameras captured Amber arriving at the building and entering. The footage showed her going to the wrong floor and approaching an apartment that belonged to Botham. Investigators pointed out that she failed to exercise due diligence and did not notice she was on the wrong floor. In addition to the video evidence, phone records played a significant role in the case. Shortly before the incident, Amber had been texting with a colleague with whom she had a personal relationship. Prosecutors argued that these messages might have distracted her and contributed to her failing to realize she was entering the wrong apartment. The defense, however, downplayed the importance of the texts, claiming they were unrelated to the incident and could not have influenced her actions. Over the course of several months, investigators continued gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses. Neighbors in the apartment complex provided statements about hearing shouts and gunshots. Some claimed they heard voices before the shots were fired, suggesting there may have been an exchange between Amber and Botham prior to the tragic event. However, witness testimonies varied, making it difficult to piece together a definitive account of what happened. At the same time, forensic examinations were conducted. Experts meticulously analyzed the firearm used in the shooting, as well as the bullet trajectory and other physical evidence, to determine the positions of Amber and Botham at the time of the shooting. One contentious point was the positioning of Botham's body and the angle of the bullet. The prosecution argued that the evidence showed Botham did not pose a threat to Amber, while the defense claimed she acted out of self-defense. In August 2019, a highly publicized trial began, attracting widespread attention from both the public and the media. The courtroom was packed with journalists, family members, and friends of Botham Jean, as well as supporters of both the prosecution and the defense. The case promised to be a difficult one, touching on issues of police competence, personal responsibility, and racial justice. The trial opened with statements from both the prosecution and the defense. Prosecutors argued that Amber Guyger's actions were not just a mistake, but the result of her negligence as a police officer. They emphasized that any officer should exercise heightened caution, especially when it comes to using a firearm. Furthermore, they pointed out that Botham Jean was in his own home and posed no threat to Amber. The defense, on the other hand, built its case around the idea that Amber was acting out of extreme exhaustion and confusion, driven by fear for her own safety. Her attorneys sought to portray her as someone who made a tragic mistake without any malicious intent. They also highlighted her previously unblemished record in law enforcement, hoping to elicit sympathy from the jury. Over the course of several weeks, witnesses, experts, and family members of both the defendant and the deceased testified. One of the most emotional moments of the trial came when Botham's mother, Allison Jean, took the stand. She spoke about her son's dreams and plans for the future, describing him as a kind and compassionate person. Her words deeply moved everyone in the courtroom, emphasizing the tremendous loss her family had endured. Also testifying was Botham's brother, Brant Jean, whose statement became one of the most talked about moments of the trial. In his address to the court, he publicly forgave Amber Guyger and even asked for permission to hug her. This gesture sparked a range of reactions. Some saw it as an incredible act of kindness and Christian forgiveness, while others felt that such an action should not overshadow the need for fair justice. Among the evidence presented in court were surveillance footage and an audio recording of Amber's 911 call after the shooting. In the recording, she can be heard in a panic, repeatedly stating that she had entered the wrong apartment and never intended to kill anyone. This call sparked further discussion, as it captured her desperation, but also highlighted the lack of any attempt to determine who was in front of her before resorting to using her weapon. The expert testimony focused on analyzing the trajectory of the bullet, the position of Botham Jean's body, and the circumstances surrounding the shooting. Experts for the prosecution argued that the bullet's path suggested Botham was in a relaxed position, likely sitting or standing up from his couch when he was shot. This contradicted the defense's claim that he had been moving toward Amber and posed a threat. However, the defense attempted to discredit these conclusions, stating that the trajectory could not be conclusively determined due to a lack of data. Throughout the trial, the public closely followed the developments of the case. Protests and rallies continued, with activists calling not only for a sentence for Amber Guyger, but also for police reform to prevent similar incidents in the future. There were widespread calls for changes to police training, especially regarding decision-making skills in high-stress situations, and for greater accountability for mistakes that lead to tragic outcomes. Amber Guyger also took the stand, describing the events of that night from her perspective. She explained how she had come home after a long shift, feeling tired and disoriented. She claimed that she genuinely believed she was in her own apartment and thought Botham was an intruder who had broken into her home. She cried as she spoke, stating that she never intended to harm anyone and that it was a terrible mistake, one that she would have to live with for the rest of her life. Her testimony was emotional and, in the opinion of some, sincere, though it sparked conflicting reactions among the audience. The question of what the appropriate sentence should be became central in the final stage of the trial. Prosecutors insisted that Amber Guyger should be convicted of manslaughter, arguing that her actions led to the death of an innocent person and that a police officer who cannot assess a situation properly should not remain on the force. The defense, on the other hand, requested a lighter sentence, citing the lack of intent and arguing that Amber already carried a heavy burden of guilt for her mistake. After several days of deliberation, the time finally came for the jury to render their verdict in the case of Amber Guyger. Tension filled the courtroom as all eyes were on the judge and jury, who would decide whether the former police officer was guilty of causing Botham Jean's death. For many, this trial had become a symbol not just of a personal tragedy, but also of the deep-rooted issues within American society: racial bias, abuse of power, and a lack of accountability within law enforcement. On October 2, 2019, the jury announced their verdict. Amber Guyger was found guilty of the crime that resulted in Botham Jean's death. This decision came as a surprise to many, particularly since the prosecution had initially sought a conviction for manslaughter. The charge carried more serious consequences and a longer prison sentence. In the courtroom, there were audible expressions of relief and quiet celebrations. This verdict was a significant step toward justice for Botham's family and those who had supported them throughout the long and painful trial. The following day, the judge delivered the sentence. Amber Guyger was sentenced to 10 years in prison. In her statement, the judge acknowledged the complexity and tragedy of the case, emphasizing that both sides had experienced significant loss. Guyger, the judge noted, had made a grave error that cost an innocent person his life. However, despite the weight of the sentence, many felt that 10 years was too lenient for a life lost as a result of such a severe mistake. While some were satisfied with the court's decision, others believed it fell short. Activists and supporters of the Jean family argued that the sentence did not reflect the gravity of the crime and was not enough punishment for the life that had been taken. Protests continued in Dallas and other cities, with many calling for further reforms in the criminal justice and law enforcement systems. This case became a symbol of the fight for justice and brought renewed attention to the challenges Black Americans face in interactions with law enforcement. Amber Guyger herself remained in shock following the verdict and sentencing. She repeatedly stated that she had no intention of harming anyone and that it was a terrible mistake. Her attorneys filed an appeal, hoping to reduce her sentence. They argued that 10 years was too harsh for someone who acted out of confusion, stress, and exhaustion. However, as the trial concluded, Guyger was taken into custody to begin serving her sentence. Botham Jean's family expressed their gratitude to everyone who supported them throughout the long months of the trial. Botham's mother, Allison Jean, stated that while the verdict provided some sense of resolution, it could never bring back her son. She emphasized the need for systemic reforms in the justice system and law enforcement to prevent similar tragedies from happening again. Allison continued to advocate for change within police departments, hoping her son's case would serve as a catalyst for meaningful progress. The case of Botham Jean had a profound impact on public opinion and the national conversation around policing. This incident became yet another example highlighting systemic issues in law enforcement and the treatment of black citizens. In response to public pressure, several states began considering legislative initiatives aimed at improving police training, particularly in situations involving the use of force and community interactions. Calls grew louder for increased accountability for officers' actions and mandatory training programs focused on racial and cultural competency. Additionally, Botham Jean's case inspired the creation of organizations and funds dedicated to supporting families of victims of police misconduct and advocating for law enforcement reform. These groups provided legal and emotional support while spearheading campaigns to raise awareness about racial discrimination and abuse of power. Allison Jean became an active participant in these initiatives, using her personal story to fight for justice and systemic change. As time passed, Amber Geiger continued to serve her sentence in prison while awaiting the outcome of her appeal. This case not only shattered the lives of two families, but also left a lasting mark on American society. The tragic mistake that led to Botham Jean's death served as a stark reminder of the need for reform and the importance of law enforcement officials making sound and responsible decisions, especially in life-and-death situations. The story of Botham Jean and Amber Geiger remains one of the most discussed and impactful cases in recent U.S. history. It underscores the profound consequences of poor judgment, particularly when exercised by those in positions of power. While justice, according to many, was only partially achieved, the case left unanswered questions and became a symbol of the ongoing fight for equality and accountability in America. On the evening of February 6, 2015, the silence of a cozy home in Goshen was shattered by a chilling discovery. Daniel Green, a respected law enforcement officer, was found lifeless in his own bathroom. 4 shots, 1 bullet to the forehead. No one heard the shots, no one saw anything suspicious, and there were no clues that could lead to the criminal. This was no accident. Everything looked as though someone acted with cold, calculated precision. Who could have taken the life of an officer who had dedicated his entire career to serving the community? The answers turned out to be far more complex and dark than anyone close to him could have imagined. The quiet of the empty house in Goshen, a small town surrounded by orchards, was abruptly interrupted. Lying on the bathroom floor, flat on his back, was a lifeless man. Daniel Green, a respected police officer. On February 6, 2015, right at noon, his colleagues, concerned that Daniel hadn't shown up for his shift, went to his home. What they found there shook them to their core. 4 bullets, one of which struck his forehead, ended the life of the 31-year-old officer. None of the neighbors had heard anything. No one had called emergency services, and not a single detail pointed to the identity of the perpetrator. There was no weapon, no trace of DNA. It all appeared as if the criminal knew exactly what they were doing, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. Daniel Green had lived in Goshen his entire life. He served in the California Police Department for 11 years and was well respected by the town's residents. He loved his job and always aimed to contribute to the community. His home was like a fortress in this quiet corner, where people knew and trusted one another. And yet, it was here that his life ended so abruptly and cruelly. The police began their investigation, which immediately focused on Daniel's personal life. He had been living alone since his divorce from 27-year-old Erica Sandoval. The relationship with her was far from simple, even after the separation. Daniel's colleagues and friends knew that Erica hadn't let him go, continuing to interfere in his life. She often tried to control him despite their official split. On February 6, 2015, Erica appeared at the scene almost immediately after she received a message from a friend. She entered the house, sobbing uncontrollably in front of the officers, insisting that she hadn't seen Daniel that day and had nothing to do with what had happened. However, her behavior raised suspicions among the investigators. She arrived at the scene too quickly, reacted too emotionally, and there were too many unanswered questions. The death of Officer Green shook the Tulare County Sheriff's Department. His colleagues began to wonder, was his tragic end related to the work he did? Or was there something personal involved? The questions kept piling up, but one thing was clear. All these mysteries had to be solved as soon as possible. Motives, connections, personal conflicts. Investigators worked tirelessly, step by step, to uncover the truth, leaving no stone unturned. Matthew and Misty, Daniel's twin brother and sister, were deeply affected by his loss. They had grown up together in Porterville, a small town in California, where from a young age the twin brothers knew they wanted to be in law enforcement. Matthew began his career in the police force but later decided to move into law. Daniel, on the other hand, stayed in the force, rising to the rank of officer and taking pride in his chosen path. Their sister always supported them and was proud of her brothers. Daniel Green was known not only for his police service but also for his passion for motorcycles. He was a member of a motorcycle club, where he spent a lot of time enjoying the sense of freedom and speed. One of his close friends, James Bonds Downey, was particularly close with Daniel. Both loved taking rides through the countryside, enjoying the road and the sense of freedom their bikes gave them. Daniel's personal life was eventful. He enjoyed going on dates and was rarely alone. There was a period when he would show up to family gatherings each month with a new girlfriend. This continued until late 2009 when he met Erica Sandoval, a 22-year-old nurse. Meeting Erica changed everything for him. He fell head over heels in love and decided to settle down. By that time, his brother and sister were already married while he was still a bachelor. But with Erica, everything was different. Daniel was infatuated with her. Angelica Ramirez, a close friend of Erica, shared that at the beginning of their relationship, Erica was deeply in love with Daniel. Their passion was intense, and at first glance, they seemed like the perfect couple. However, as Daniel's sister recalled, Erica, despite her friendliness, could snap in an instant if something didn't go her way. Over time, tension built in their relationship, escalating into frequent conflicts and arguments. Erica Sandoval was born and raised in Southern California in a middle-class family. She had a brother, David Sandoval, who remembered that Erica, being the only daughter, always felt special. Her parents spoiled her and tried to give her the best of everything. She never experienced hardship or mistreatment and grew up expecting her wishes to be fulfilled without question. Erica always received support and attention from her parents and brother, which instilled in her a sense of entitlement and the belief that she deserved special treatment. The unexpected news of Daniel Green and Erica Sandoval's secret wedding in Las Vegas took everyone close to them by surprise. Daniel was 26 and Erica was 23 when they decided to tie the knot without telling anyone in advance. Daniel's brother and sister couldn't believe their eyes when they received a late-night message with a photo of the marriage certificate. A few weeks later, the newlyweds organized a small wedding celebration for their close ones, where Erica wore a white dress and Daniel wore a black suit. However, despite their apparent happiness, Daniel and Erica's relationship was far from perfect. Herb Adams, Daniel's friend and fellow motorcyclist, recalled how Daniel once shared that, even before their marriage, they had a fight, and Erica took a razor and slashed the furniture in his home. It was a troubling sign that, in Herb's opinion, should not have been ignored. Matthew, Daniel's brother, personally saw the damage and was concerned, but Daniel insisted it was just an emotional outburst. The conflicts within the family continued. Matthew and Daniel's sister witnessed one of these incidents. During an argument, Erica grabbed Daniel, shouting at him. In the next room, his brother and sister heard Daniel break down in tears. Matthew remembered that it was one of the most painful moments of his life. He felt devastated hearing his brother cry. Nevertheless, intervening in Daniel and Erica's relationship was difficult. The Green family grew up in challenging circumstances. Daniel's brother and sister remembered how they, along with their mother, endured harsh treatment from their stepfather. He had a criminal past, often drank heavily, and used banned substances. Matthew and Daniel, being older than their sister, often took the brunt of it to protect her. Eventually, their mother managed to get a restraining order, and soon after, their stepfather passed away. These events left a mark on each of them. Daniel's relationship with Erica had alarming parallels to his childhood. Family members noticed that Erica controlled her husband, isolated him from friends and family, and verbally demeaned him. Despite Daniel being a police officer, frequently encountering victims of domestic aggression, he couldn't admit that he was in a similar situation himself. He knew he was becoming a victim but couldn't do anything about it. Fear, shame, and the reluctance to acknowledge vulnerability held him back. Men, just like women, often do not report domestic aggression for the very same reasons. The issues in Daniel and Erica's marriage reached a peak in February 2011. A neighbor of Daniel's witnessed a loud confrontation between the couple. Erica was yelling and provoking her husband, trying to push him over the edge. Daniel tried to keep his composure, knowing that losing control could cost him his career. At one point, he asked the neighbor to call emergency services to stop the situation. The police arrested Erica, but despite the seriousness of the incident, Daniel refused to press charges, and she was soon released. This incident became a point of no return for Daniel, and he decided that their relationship was over. In January 2012, after only a year of official marriage, they divorced and moved apart. A few months after the divorce, Erica told her friends that she was pregnant with Daniel's child. The news quickly reached Daniel, and despite everything they had been through, he decided to try to start over for the sake of the future baby. They resumed their relationship and moved back in together. Daniel's family hoped that this time things would be different and that their arguments would be a thing of the past. Daniel did everything he could to maintain peace at home and eagerly awaited the birth of the baby. However, the problems did not go away. Erica often complained to her friend Angelica Ramirez about Daniel's harsh behavior. She claimed that Daniel could be cold and indifferent and that she felt unhappy in the relationship. Angelica recalled that Erica would say that Daniel grabbed her by the neck and tried to choke her. She feared that one day it could end tragically. Angelica tried to support Erica but understood her influence was limited. At the same time, Daniel's relatives and friends spoke about Erica's aggressive tendencies. She slashed mattresses and sofas, damaged Daniel's property. This was an example of uncontrolled behavior that she exhibited. The conflicts escalated month by month, but neither side sought help. Their relationship remained unstable, and the tension only continued to build. Daniel and Erica, despite their efforts to keep the family together, continued to live in constant tension. Friends and loved ones noticed that their relationship increasingly resembled a vicious cycle in which both suffered but neither dared to change the situation. Both hid their problems, unwilling to seek help, and their story became a series of mutual accusations and suffering. On January 5, 2013, Erica gave birth to a son whom they named Aiden. At that moment, their relationship seemed to finally be improving. Daniel was thrilled to become a father and felt like his life had new meaning. For the sake of his family, he decided to sell his motorcycle, understanding that the safety and well-being of his loved ones were more important. This decision was not easy for him, but he did it for Aiden and for stability in their family. Daniel posted pictures with his son on social media. These were his moments of joy, his happy life. However, just 6 months later, the tension started building again. Constant conflicts and arguments became more frequent. Daniel suggested that Erica move out, and she agreed, but she took Aiden with her and completely cut off contact with her ex-husband. Unable to see his son, Daniel fell into a deep depression. He decided to fight for custody of Aiden, which led to the start of a serious conflict between them. These events unfolded against the backdrop of another incident that left a significant mark on Daniel's life. Shortly before Aiden's birth, during a motorcycle ride with a friend, Daniel's brakes suddenly failed. They pulled over and Daniel discovered that some wires had been cut. He immediately suspected that Erica could have been responsible. When he returned home, he confronted her directly, but Erica denied everything. She insisted that she would never do anything that would threaten his life. Daniel chose not to involve the police and didn't tell anyone about the incident, preferring not to draw attention and to avoid further conflicts. Erica strongly disapproved of Daniel's passion for motorcycles. She considered them dangerous. Every time he returned from a ride, they argued, and the tension in their relationship only grew. The disputes about the motorcycle reached their peak after the incident with the cut brakes. Daniel realized that their relationship was becoming destructive, but he decided to keep things quiet, trying to control the situation and minimize the fallout. After selling the motorcycle and with the birth of his son, Daniel hoped that their family would enter a more peaceful period. But the conflicts and tension did not go away. In the fall of 2014, while Daniel and Erica were spending another night together, an incident occurred that left Daniel completely shaken. In the middle of the night, he woke up to find Erica standing over him with a gun. She was pointing it at him and said that she had a nightmare in which Daniel was unfaithful to her. She stated that she wanted to end his life so she wouldn't have to feel that pain anymore. Daniel managed to calm her down, assuring her that it was just a dream and that he had never betrayed her. Erica seemed to relax and lowered the gun. After this, Daniel realized that their relationship had become dangerous. He confided in his friends about the incident and decided it was time to end the destructive relationship for good. Despite this incident, in January 2015, they met again to celebrate their son Aiden's second birthday. At the family gathering held for close relatives, everyone saw Daniel and Erica chatting affectionately. Daniel even kissed her on the cheek, and many thought they were back together. However, Daniel knew that a future together was impossible and did not want to return to the old arguments and conflicts. After that meeting, Daniel told his friends that he had a new girlfriend, 20-year-old Brenda Vela. He posted a photo of them together on social media, sharing the happy news. He seemed genuinely happy, and many hoped that he was finally entering a new, calmer phase of his life. But soon, a tragic event took place. On the morning of February 6, 2015, Daniel dropped Aiden off at Erica's house as they had planned. Afterward, he went to the gym. After his workout, he returned home, where his life came to a sudden end. Daniel went into the bathroom, sat down, and was shot 4 times in the arm, chest, neck, and forehead. He was killed instantly without a chance to defend himself. The history of their relationship had always been filled with conflict and mutual accusations. Their text messages revealed constant aggression. Hundreds of messages were filled with anger and insults. Daniel accused Erica of trying to take away what was most precious to him, his son. Erica, in turn, accused him of selfishness and of being an unfit father. Their arguments ranged from parenting issues to personal attacks. There was no constructive dialogue, and the tension only continued to grow. But then, there was an unexpected reconciliation. None of their friends or relatives understood why they started spending time together again. On the surface, it appeared as if they were giving their relationship another chance. The arguments seemed to stop, and it looked like they had found some harmony. But as we know, this peace was temporary, and soon everything went back to the way it was before. Erica was brought in for questioning the day after Daniel's death. She claimed she hadn't been to his house in weeks and had nothing to do with what had happened. Investigators informed her that they had footage from a neighboring home's surveillance camera showing her entering the house on the day of the crime. In reality, Erica's identification from the video was inconclusive, but the investigators decided to use this tactic to make her panic. This strategy worked. Erica couldn't handle the pressure and confessed. She even pointed out where she had discarded the firearm used in the crime. The prosecutor argued that the motive for the crime was jealousy and the feeling of being replaced by another woman. When Erica was arrested, a note was found in her purse with Brenda's name and birth year, indicating that Erica had been tracking Daniel's new girlfriend. The evidence against her was compelling, but the trial didn't start until October 1, 2019, 5 years after the tragic event. In the days leading up to the crime, Erica called Daniel about 170 times, trying to re-establish contact. She had learned that Daniel had introduced their son Aiden to Brenda, and that they were spending time together. This had pushed her over the edge. The prosecutor also stated that after the crime, Erica deleted several messages from Daniel's phone. These messages contained her attempts to convince Daniel that she would change and become better. However, Daniel had responded that he wanted nothing more to do with her and intended to move on. During the trial, Erica's attorney insisted that Daniel had been an abusive husband who subjected her to systematic aggression. Audio recordings of heated arguments were presented, in which Daniel could be heard insulting and threatening Erica. These recordings became a crucial part of her defense, demonstrating that there was aggression and cruelty in their relationship. Erica, speaking in court, described in detail the instances of abuse she had endured over the years. She claimed that Daniel had physically assaulted her, grabbed her by the neck, and threatened her. Erica said she lived in constant fear and didn't report it to the police because she thought it would be useless. According to her, Daniel, being a police officer, could influence any investigation and was too powerful for her to expect justice. Erica believed that no one would believe her, as Daniel was a well-respected figure in the community. On February 5, 2015, the day before the crime, Erica claimed she had spoken to Daniel on the phone. According to her, they were flirting with each other, which gave her hope of rekindling their relationship. The next day, she decided to go to his house to see if it was possible to reconnect. When she entered the house, she saw 2 firearms on the table, which immediately made her uneasy. Erica decided to look around the house more carefully and found a partially open safe in one of the rooms. Inside, she found 2 intimate photos of people who, in her opinion, appeared to be underage. This shocked her and led her to suspect that Daniel might pose a threat to their son. Erica claimed that seeing those photos changed her perception of Daniel. She remembered how he had made her wear school uniforms and began to understand that his interests might be much darker than she had thought. After putting the documents back, Erica heard the sound of a car pulling up. It was Daniel. Panicking, she grabbed both loaded firearms and hid in one of the rooms, not knowing what to do next. When Daniel entered the house, he walked through the rooms. Erica heard him head to the bathroom. With the firearms in her hands, she followed him, overwhelmed by fear. When she entered the bathroom, she saw Daniel sitting on the toilet. He noticed her and shouted angrily, threatening her. At that moment, according to her, she began shooting. She didn't remember how many shots she fired, but kept shooting until she felt the threat was gone. Then she ran out of the house, disposed of the weapons, and tried to flee. Erica also admitted that she continued to engage in intimate relations with Daniel despite all the mistreatment because she feared his reaction to refusal. She claimed that if she didn't satisfy him, he would become aggressive. This was one of the reasons she stayed with him. She feared the potential consequences of refusing or trying to stand up to his demands. She felt that her safety directly depended on complying with his wishes. Erica mentioned the photos she found in Daniel's safe for the first time during the trial. According to her, she had deliberately kept quiet about it during the investigation because she didn't trust the authorities and believed they would side with her ex-husband. Daniel's relatives were horrified by these claims and categorically refused to believe them. Erica insisted that she feared her words would be ignored or misinterpreted. However, Erica's claims were not substantiated. The officers who searched Daniel's home found no prohibited photos or any evidence supporting her accusations. The prosecutor insisted that everything Erica said was a lie, meant to avoid facing justice. Erica's attorney tried to portray Daniel in a negative light, pointing out that his phone and computer contained hundreds of intimate photos and videos involving adults. Furthermore, the attorney noted that over 1,000 images had been deleted from Daniel's phone years ago, which, in his view, could indicate dark secrets. Erica might have had legitimate reasons to fear him. Erica expressed regret for her actions and apologized to Daniel's family. She said she never wanted things to end so tragically, and her actions were driven by panic and fear for her son. Erica's attorney also argued that the blame for Daniel's death did not lie solely with Erica but also with Daniel himself. They were trapped in a traumatic relationship from which neither could escape, and their fate seemed destined for a tragic end. The jury deliberated for nearly 4 days but could not reach a unanimous decision, resulting in a mistrial. Erica's attorney considered this a success, as it provided an opportunity to revisit the case and develop a new defense strategy. Despite this, Erica was stripped of her parental rights, and Daniel's brother Matthew Green and his wife adopted Aiden. A new trial was scheduled for 2020 but was repeatedly postponed due to the pandemic. The most recent hearing took place in December 2022, but a final decision has yet to be made. Erica Sandoval is currently in custody awaiting trial. She faces the death penalty if found guilty. Attorneys for both sides continue to prepare for the next phase of the trial, which could be decisive in this complex case. This tragedy served as a lesson for many, reminding us how far jealousy and personal demons can lead if help is not sought and toxic relationships are not severed in time. Too many lives were destroyed, too much pain and too many unspoken words were left behind. Yet, even amid this darkness, there were those who continued to fight for a brighter future, doing everything possible for little Aiden's happiness. The story may have ended, but its echoes will be heard for a long time, reminding everyone of what can sometimes be hidden behind the closed doors of seemingly perfect homes. The Jansen family seemed like any other, caring, close-knit, and always ready to support one another. But one day everything changed. Something happened within their home, something so shocking that even their closest friends couldn't believe it. Behind this mystery lay a series of events that shattered the family and left everyone around them in utter disbelief. Law enforcement, friends, and neighbors all tried to piece together what could have caused this seemingly perfect family to fall apart, and what exactly transpired behind closed doors. In the dense forests of British Columbia, among small, quiet towns with brick storefronts and cozy coffee shops, Randy Jansen lived a seemingly unremarkable life. Langley, a small town many considered a peaceful refuge, had been Randy's home since childhood. But behind this serene facade were years of hard work and dreams that didn't always lead to happiness. From an early age, Randy shared a close bond with his father, who worked at a local lumber mill. His father taught him everything he knew about woodworking, and after graduating high school, Randy followed in his footsteps by getting a job at the same mill. The work was requiring long shifts and immense physical effort, but Randy was accustomed to such challenges. In Langley, many saw the lumber mill as a staple of the local economy, a way of life for most residents, and Randy was no exception. For over a decade, he dedicated himself to the demanding routine of processing wood and transporting logs. While the work was monotonous and exhausting, it gave him a sense of stability and pride. Each day may have looked the same, but Randy found purpose in the rhythm of his labor and his place in the community. If the lumber mill represented stability, music was Randy's escape, a way to express the emotions he couldn't always put into words. Music had been a part of his life since childhood, and over time, playing guitar and singing evolved from a hobby into a vital outlet. He frequently performed at a local bar in Langley, where townsfolk would gather to unwind after their own long workdays and enjoy live performances. On stage, Randy transformed. His usually reserved and quiet demeanor gave way to an engaging and energetic presence that captivated his audience. The locals loved his heartfelt performances, which radiated authenticity and passion, giving Randy a sense of fulfillment and connection that his day-to-day life often lacked. It was at that local bar, on a seemingly ordinary evening, that Randy met Laurel, the woman who would change his life forever. Laurel was 6 years older than Randy, working as a bartender, often watching his performances from behind the counter. Confident and charismatic, Laurel was beloved by patrons for her ability to create a warm, friendly atmosphere and her open, approachable demeanor. What started as casual conversations, first about music, then about life, quickly grew into a deeper connection. Their shared passion for music and mutual dreams brought them closer together. Laurel played the piano and, despite her life taking a different path, had always dreamed of pursuing music professionally. This shared dream, coupled with a genuine interest in one another, soon blossomed into something much more profound. Life at the lumber mill continued as usual for Randy, but now it was colored by the presence of Laurel. Their bond deepened as they began planning a future together. Langley, though comfortable, began to feel too small for the dreams they shared. They envisioned a life where music wasn't just a hobby, but the foundation of their future. Randy's days at the mill, nights performing at the bar, and evenings spent with Laurel gave him a newfound sense of purpose, love, and hope for the road ahead. Randy and Laurel often reminisced about the day they got married in 1990. It was a simple ceremony, attended by only their closest friends and family, filled with a cozy, intimate atmosphere. Live music, highlighted by a song Randy performed for his bride, marked the beginning of a life filled with love and shared dreams. A few years after their wedding, their daughter Emily was born, becoming the center of their world. Randy often proudly declared that Emily was the best thing to ever happen to him, and his love for her was evident to anyone who knew the family. Emily was just 8 years old when her life took an unexpected and difficult turn. She began experiencing sudden, intense headaches that were so debilitating she could no longer continue her musical pursuits. From a young age, Emily had shown remarkable talent in singing, captivating her parents with her voice and earning accolades in competitions. She had been living a vibrant life, attending vocal lessons and dreaming of becoming a singer. Her parents, inspired by her success, did everything they could to support her ambitions. At first, Randy and Laurel were at a loss to understand what was happening to their daughter. Visits to doctors and numerous medical tests provided no clear answers, leaving them in the dark about her condition. Emily had to leave school and switch to home-based learning because the bright lights and noisy environment of classrooms triggered more excruciating headaches. Her room became a dimly lit refuge where she spent most of her time. Randy and Laurel took turns caring for her, doing everything in their power to ease her pain and provide comfort in the face of her suffering. After extensive medical evaluations, doctors finally arrived at a diagnosis: migraine. It was a devastating blow for the entire family. The medications prescribed to Emily offered only minimal relief, reducing her pain somewhat but never fully stopping the attacks. The music she had once loved so deeply, her greatest source of joy, was now out of reach. Emily, once a lively and energetic young woman, became increasingly withdrawn, spending most of her time in silence and darkness. Randy and Laurel desperately searched for ways to help their daughter. They tried countless treatments, consulted numerous specialists, and explored alternative therapies, but nothing brought the lasting relief they so desperately hoped for. Medical predictions were grim. Migraines are often a lifelong condition, and many people have to endure the pain indefinitely. Statistics showed that about 53% of individuals with migraines are unable to drive due to their symptoms, 30% struggle to complete their education, and 34% face challenges with employment. While these numbers made Emily's condition medically common, they did nothing to ease her parents' anguish as they watched their daughter's vibrancy fade. These years were particularly hard on Randy. Music, once his sanctuary, became a painful reminder that Emily could no longer engage with the passion that had brought her so much joy. The evenings he spent playing guitar now felt hollow without Emily's voice to accompany him, and performing at the local bar, where he once thrived, no longer brought him happiness. He started spending more time at home, staying close to Emily and offering support as best he could. But as Emily's suffering worsened, Randy and Laurel felt increasingly helpless. Their once energetic daughter, who had been so full of life and determination, now spent her days confined to her room, avoiding light and noise. Though Randy continued to work, his thoughts were always with Emily, and each day he woke up hoping to find a way to ease her pain. By the time Emily turned 18, her condition had deteriorated further. Her migraine episodes became more frequent and severe, sometimes lasting for days on end. The unrelenting pain disrupted her ability to study and maintain friendships. Despite these challenges, Emily refused to give up on her ambitions. She enrolled in the University of British Columbia's arts program, pursuing a path in the fine arts with the dream of one day becoming an opera singer. For Emily, attending university wasn't just an academic endeavor. It was a chance to reclaim a sense of normalcy and move closer to the life she had always envisioned. Despite the physical exhaustion and constant episodes of pain, Emily pushed herself to stay engaged. She took vocal lessons, studied music theory, art history, and literature. She even participated in student events and concerts whenever she could, despite the challenges she faced. Her classmates admired her determination to remain involved in university life, even during difficult times. But behind the scenes, her activity masked a painful struggle. Emily often had to miss classes and catch up on her studies independently. The powerful medications prescribed to manage her migraines left Emily feeling fatigued, drowsy, and weak. Her treatment plan included triptans, anticonvulsants, and antidepressants to alleviate her symptoms. However, these drugs came with significant side effects: depression, trouble concentrating, and a general decline in her physical well-being. Over time, Emily began to avoid medication as much as possible to reduce its impact on her body, opting instead to explore alternative methods of managing her condition. Emily turned to meditation and breathing exercises, applied cold compresses to her head, and avoided triggers like bright lights, strong odors, and loud noises. Her room became a sanctuary where she could retreat from anything that worsened her pain. During the most unbearable episodes, she spent entire days in the dark, shielded from light and sound, while her parents, Randy and Laurel, took turns caring for her and doing whatever they could to ease her suffering. Even so, Emily tried her best to maintain a sense of normalcy. She kept in touch with her friends, though she couldn't see them as often as she used to. Sometimes she had to cancel plans at the last minute because of a sudden migraine attack, but her friends never abandoned her. They would visit her at home, spending time with her and offering support to make sure she didn't feel isolated. Despite the limitations her condition imposed, Emily refused to give up on the things she cherished. Her determination to return to her music and live a full life never wavered, no matter how difficult the journey became. On May 7, 2015, Randy Jansen posted a message on Facebook that shocked everyone who knew him. In this post, he confessed to committing unthinkable acts over the previous 10 days. He began by writing about his daughter, Emily, describing her as the best daughter anyone could ever hope for: talented, intelligent, and kind-hearted. Emily brought so much joy to their lives, filling their home with laughter and always offering help to others, even when she was struggling. But her illness had stolen so much from her, forcing her to let go of the dreams she had worked so hard to achieve. Emily had been suffering from migraines since elementary school. The constant pain led to deep depression, and days where the pain didn't stop for even a moment became her reality. Randy described how his daughter would watch her classmates living normal lives, while she spent her days in hospitals or in her dark, silent room. Despite everything, Emily tried to hold on to hope, dreaming of a better future. But nothing seemed to work. Randy worked at a lumber mill, but every moment he wasn't working was spent with his daughter. He told friends that Emily was his entire life and that he couldn't imagine living without her. Watching her suffer, unable to do anything to help, pushed him to the edge of despair. Friends recalled how Randy opened up to them about his pain, and it was clear how much he was struggling emotionally. One day, Randy made a decision that would alter everything. In a Facebook post, he admitted that he had taken a gun and ended Emily's life, explaining that he wanted to free her from the unrelenting pain. He wrote about how he pictured her as an angel, floating above the clouds, her long hair flowing in the wind, finally free from her suffering. He didn't stop there. Randy revealed that he had also taken the life of his wife, Laurel, stating that he couldn't bear the thought of her living with the heartbreak of losing their daughter. A few days later, he ended the life of his sister, Shelley, saying he didn't want her to live with the shame of his actions. In the post, Randy explained that Emily had tried everything possible to recover. He described her strength and resilience, but ultimately, the illness had broken her. He shared how powerless he felt watching her suffer every day, knowing there was nothing he could do. Randy had told friends many times that he would do anything for Emily, and in the end, he believed this was the only way to help her. After Randy published the post, his friends and acquaintances immediately contacted the police. They were horrified by what they read and wanted to ensure the safety of Randy's family. The post left many in disbelief, struggling to process the magnitude of what had happened. Law enforcement quickly responded after receiving multiple calls, including one from Brian Jones, a close friend of Randy's. Officers were dispatched to Randy's home to investigate. Brian Jones, one of Randy's closest friends, felt an overwhelming sense of fear and confusion as he read the Facebook post. At first, he hoped it was a mistake or some kind of cruel joke. But when he saw the signature at the end, a nickname Randy had used since their school days, he realized his friend had written those words. The gravity of the situation hit Brian immediately, and he knew he had to act fast. He left work early and headed toward Shelley's house, trying to reach Randy on the phone along the way. Each unanswered call only deepened his concern. When Brian arrived at Shelley's house, he noticed a stack of undelivered newspapers on the porch. This struck him as strange, as Shelley was known for being reliable and never neglecting her responsibilities. Her old van was parked in the driveway, and the curtains were drawn tightly over the windows. The yard was eerily quiet, with no signs of activity. Brian knocked on the door several times, but there was no answer. Everything about the scene felt unsettling and ominously quiet. Shelley had lived a reclusive life after their parents passed away. She lived alone, didn't have children, and rarely interacted with her neighbors. Her main responsibility was delivering newspapers, and she was known for being punctual and consistent with her work. The sight of the untouched newspapers immediately raised alarm bells for Brian. He knew something was wrong and decided to call the police. When he reached the dispatcher, they informed him that he wasn't the first person to report concerns about the family. A patrol unit had already been dispatched to check on the situation. At the end of his Facebook post, Randy had written that his family was now in a better place, free from pain. He expressed regret for his actions, took full responsibility, and apologized to anyone he had hurt. The post concluded with the haunting words, "Rest in peace, my little family." Reading this, Brian felt a wave of shock and disbelief. He had always known Randy as a kind and caring person, someone who loved his family deeply. The idea that his friend was capable of such an act, or even owned a firearm, was incomprehensible to him. He recalled how Randy always spoke about his family with love and devotion, and he struggled to understand how things could have taken such a dark turn. When police arrived, they attempted to establish contact with Randy Jansen, who was inside his home. Officers spotted him through a second-floor window holding a firearm. They used loudspeakers and tried calling him on the phone, but Randy did not respond. The officers were acutely aware of how tense the situation was, and knew they had to proceed carefully to avoid escalating it further. The house was surrounded, and negotiators began their efforts, but Randy showed no signs of surrendering or willingness to communicate. After several hours, the standoff escalated into something far more dangerous. Randy set the house on fire, and officers noticed smoke billowing from the upper floor. Attempts to enter the home were unsuccessful. The flames spread too quickly, cutting off access. Through the windows, officers spotted a body on the first floor wrapped in a sheet, but they were unable to reach it for identification. Within minutes, the fire consumed the entire house, forcing the officers to retreat. Firefighters arrived on the scene, but the house was already fully engulfed in flames, making it impossible to save. The fire was so intense that access to the interior remained unsafe for several days, even after the blaze was extinguished. It wasn't until May 10th, 3 days after the fire, that investigators were able to enter the charred remains of the house to begin their examination. Inside the burned-out home, investigators found 3 bodies. 19-year-old Emily was discovered in her bedroom, her body wrapped in a sheet. 50-year-old Laurel was found in the kitchen, similarly covered with a blanket. Investigators determined that both had sustained 2 gunshot wounds to the head, inflicted approximately 10 days before Randy wrote his Facebook post. Randy's own body was found in a second-floor bedroom. He had taken his own life with a firearm before setting the house on fire. Based on the position of his body and the remains of the weapon, it was clear that Randy had been in a state of profound emotional distress when he made the decision to end his life. When police arrived at Shelley's home, Randy's sister, they found her body in the living room. Shelley had also been shot twice in the head, her body similarly covered with a blanket. Investigators concluded that she had died 2 days before she was discovered, with no signs of a struggle at the scene, suggesting that Randy had caught her off guard. Emily's condition had deteriorated significantly over the past year. Doctors had resorted to administering morphine injections to ease her excruciating pain. These injections were a last resort, and neighbors often saw her parents helping her into the house after hospital visits. Emily had become so weak that she needed support just to walk. These moments were heartbreaking for everyone who knew the family. Randy Jansen, Emily's father, always tried his best to care for his family despite the many challenges they faced. A year before the tragic events, he sought help from the family doctor due to persistent insomnia and overwhelming stress. He confided in the doctor about how difficult it was to witness his daughter's suffering. The doctor suggested sedatives and recommended that Randy try to get more rest, but Randy declined the medication, believing it wouldn't address the real problem. Brian Jones, a close friend of Randy's, recalled that Randy had never expressed any thoughts of self-harm or a desire to hurt others. He described Randy as a calm, hard-working man who was always ready to lend a hand. Randy prioritized his family above everything else, and no one could have imagined he was capable of such actions. However, Brian noted that Randy had reached his breaking point. He could no longer bear to watch his daughter suffer and ultimately made a devastating decision. Many neighbors who had known Randy since childhood found the events impossible to reconcile with the man they remembered. They described him as a kind and gentle person, someone who had never shown signs of aggression or cruelty. To them, his actions seemed born out of desperation and an inability to cope with the pain and anguish surrounding his family. One neighbor recalled Randy saying that if his daughter ever left this world, he wouldn't have a reason to live. Despite those words, Randy lived in the house with the bodies of his wife and daughter for 10 days before taking his own life. Emily's final tweet, posted 4 days before the tragedy, read, "I complain about the pain, but at least I'm here to feel it. I thank God for the chance to live." The post reflected her desire to hold on to life despite the immense suffering she endured. Her social media messages often conveyed her fight to stay positive in the face of her illness. She tried to maintain a sense of hope, even when her circumstances seemed bleak. Emily was remembered as a kind and compassionate young woman who worked to stay connected with the world around her. She had a passion for music and sang in the local church when her health allowed it. Many Langley residents fondly recalled her performances. As her condition worsened, her appearances at church became less frequent, but she remained thoughtful and giving. She would bake with her mother and share treats with neighbors, and on her better days, she even helped local kids with their homework. Laurel, Emily's mother, did everything she could to support her daughter. In one of her Twitter posts, she wrote, "Emily is back in the hospital, praying to God they can help her. I feel so helpless." These words reflected the pain and despair she felt while watching her daughter suffer. Laurel was on the verge of emotional exhaustion, but refused to give up, constantly searching for ways to ease Emily's condition. Shelley, Randy's sister, also had no way of foreseeing the tragedy that would unfold. No one in the family imagined their fates would be decided in such a devastating way. Over the last year, Randy often confided in friends about the overwhelming burden and stress caused by Emily's illness. No one could have predicted that Randy would one day reach such a fragile emotional state that he would decide to take the lives of his family. As mentioned earlier, Emily maintained a Twitter account where she shared her thoughts. Her posts showed that she wasn't giving up. Shortly before the tragedy, she wrote, "For the first time in 2 years, I've gone 12 hours without pain. I'm so tired of hurting, but I need to keep going." Her determination to fight, despite the immense challenges, was evident in her words. Randy, however, couldn't cope with the emotional weight any longer. Laurel was also deeply affected, watching their daughter's health decline. Her posts on Twitter mirrored her anguish. Despite their despair, the family tried to support one another. But the situation continued to deteriorate, and none of them could foresee where it would lead. Now that the details have come to light, it's clear how despair, hidden struggles, and a profound sense of hopelessness culminated in a tragedy no one expected. The story of the Jansen family is a grim reminder that even behind seemingly solid walls, unimaginable pain can simmer beneath the surface, sometimes erupting in ways no one could predict. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope the stories gave you something to think about or dream about. Sleep well, stay safe, and don't forget to subscribe. Good night.